All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. So, before I get started, I'll just briefly say that this stream is demonetized, so you don't have to worry about any ad breaks. And I will be putting timestamps in the description shortly after I finish the stream. So, you should be able to navigate around topics and just go to the topics that are of more interest to you. All right. So, yeah, I'll bring in my guest for the stream.
Hey,
How's it,
hey, sorry.
yeah, how's it going, Cody?
Oh, it's going good. I'm actually glad to be a part of this particular stream because it's about a subject I'm actually pretty well versed about, or at least shows that I'm a bit more versed about compared to last time with the Woman King and Cleopatra. Which, well, at least these shows didn't make me want to claw my ears out.
Yeah, true. Um, the that was a good show. We were discussing some absolute shite last time. And it is nice to be discussing stuff which isn't complete garbage, namely One Piece. But we will get to that. I just want to start with and we'll get straight into it. I want to start with the best show of the year so far that you've seen, because I was thinking about this, and this was going to be my first topic. It was going to be, what's the best show so far of the year that you've seen? Because I like to start off the stream on a nice positive before we get into the more negative stuff. And I was thinking about it, and I decided this is pointless. This is absolutely pointless, because all of the series so far this year, the vast majority of them, with the exception of One Piece and maybe The Last of Us, they've all been shite. So I was gonna say there's two shows that I would genuinely recommend to people: One Piece and The Last of Us. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, I wouldn't recommend The Last of Us. I think it's a good show. I think at its best, it's excellent, and at its worst, it's pretty terrible. But it's kind of a patchy show, The Last of Us, and not as quite as good as its reputation suggests. Still decent, still worth watching, absolutely. But I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend it. One Piece I would, but just listen to this list. This is a list of the shows that have come out so far this year. So Velma, Ahsoka, Mandalorian season 3, Cleopatra, The Last of Us was actually quite decent. Secret Invasion was abysmal. I only watched 2 episodes of it, and my god, it was almost unwatchably bad. Wheel of Time season 2, The Witcher season 3, and then we've also got Robin Hood upcoming. I think they released the first episode of that last night,
Oh
and
God.
Loki. And there was a show that was getting some noise. It's more of a normie show. It's called Yellow Jackets. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I attempted to watch it. It's basically a female Lord of the Flies, and it was terrible. And not just because of some girl power feminist aspect, which is of course ridiculous. Like a bunch of women looking lost in the woods are not going to start killing each other. It was just because it was so poorly made. It was so bad. I tried to watch the first episode, and it kept jumping between all these characters that they wanted to introduce to you. So it would be a new character every 5 minutes, but it would first do the present day iteration, and then it would go back to that character around the time of the plane crash, and then go back to the present day. So you were getting, like, within the space of 30 minutes, you were getting like 20 different characters, both young and old, and you had no idea who the hell was who. It was an absolute mess. But all that aside, is there a show that you would recommend so far this year that you've seen?
Well, that depends. What do you consider a show these days? What do you consider a show? Does it have to be like a live action thing, or could it be an anime that I
That could
saw?
be anything. It could be anything. I mean, we'll start with live action. Is there any live action that you would recommend?
Hmm. I haven't really watched a lot of live action stuff recently, just because it always seems like there's never anything good live action related these days. I try sometimes to watch live action stuff every now and again if it looks appealing, but most of the stuff that seems to come out these days really just doesn't seem appealing just from the images or even the trailers and such. Although, I mean, I did hear about that Robin Hood thing, but once I saw that it was like some kind of modern day techno punk thing instead of just like a regular Robin Hood show, I was like, no thanks, I'll pass. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And what about otherwise? I mean, I know you're a big anime fan. Have you been watching that?
Yeah, there's this one anime called Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead. I don't know if you've heard about it.
Yeah,
It's basically kind of like it takes the classic zombie apocalypse scenario, but rather than it focusing on all the nihilistic negative stuff, humanity is evil and killing each other and all that jazz, it focuses more on people like what you would do if you had the kind of freedom to basically do whatever you want. I guess you could think of it almost like focusing on the you only live once kind of philosophy, because it focuses on these characters who were beaten down or whose lives before the apocalypse were miserable. And now they're using the fact that the world's gone crazy anyway as a way to basically fulfill all their childhood dreams, literally making a list of stuff they want to do throughout the apocalypse, and just trying to make the most of it, making the best of a bad situation. It's not groundbreaking or anything, but it's definitely a comfort food kind of series that focuses a lot more on optimism and positivity and just living life with a positive attitude, rather than the more negative aspect of how zombie movies is always like drib and dreary and all that stuff,
yeah.
like you usually see like in The Walking Dead or anything else. It's definitely a show that makes you feel good and uplifting after you see it, especially if you're someone who, like worked an office job that you didn't care for very much in the beginning, because that's what it focuses on.
That's actually quite interesting because the biggest problem with zombie movies and zombie TV shows is that they they like you said, they tend to be very depressing and it's all very negative. And it's such a cliche genre as well. It's almost like the storyline itself is every single storyline you can imagine has already been done in the zombie universe, because ultimately what it boils down to is there needs to be a balance of um, resources in the area that the person or the group goes to in order for them to survive. Like they need to have enough water and they need to have enough food, shelter, and safety. Those are the four main things you need in a zombie apocalypse, right? Food,
Hmm.
water, shelter, safety, and weapons. Five things. I mean, weapons falls into safety, but I'm also including buildings and stuff and such. And what happens in zombie shows is the characters run out of one of them, or they run out of two of them. So, for example, everything's going great and they're on a farm and they've got all the food and water that they need and they got a nice house. But the problem is that the zombies are coming and they don't have all of the weapons that they need. So one of them has to go and get a weapon and then he gets bitten and then there's no weapons. So they have to move somewhere else because they get overrun. Then they're doing all right in the next location. And what happens? They get a drought and it becomes too dry. So they have to move because there's no water. And it's so predictable. It's so dull. That's exactly what happened with The Walking Dead, and a lot of shows do, and even movies do that now in the
Yeah.
zombie thing, and that's how they move the action forward. And with this show, if the idea is, you know what, let's take the setting of a zombie movie, but let's do something a bit different with it. Yeah, that's good because the zombie genre almost reminds me of the superhero genre in that the in order to do something that is genuinely good and interesting for audiences, you would have to go left field and do something really interesting with it, something that people haven't seen before. Otherwise, you're just regurgitating things that people have seen a million times.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the whole, the things you need in a zombie apocalypse, because one of the main characters, Shizuka, she starts out a lot like that. She's the logical one who, in her intro scene, she's actually watching a bunch of zombie movies, going over all the basic things and going over how you need to, you need to you need certain food, water. You shouldn't eat things like sugar and all that stuff because it'll slow you down and everything. She starts out as like the kind of stereotypical hardcore survivalist who you would expect to see in a zombie movie. But as the series goes on, she starts to open up a bit more and decides to do more than just live. She lives she more than just survive. She tries to live. That's I think the core of what makes the show good. It's not about surviving, it's about living, being happy, making every moment count, because like you said, in a zombie apocalypse, the next day could be your last. So the main character's whole thing is just living it as best as they can, because any day could be their last. So why not make it as fun as you can? And they do later on in the story in the manga, they do try to at least address the whole finding a cure for the zombie outbreak. But for the most part, it's more about just making friendships and relationships, doing things you always wanted to do, and just having fun in the best best way you can. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's something that we need a lot more in entertainment. Just have fun and be happy.
Yeah. I'll just read some of the chat before we get on to our next topic here. So let's see. Moderate Chungus says, I'm sure the Despot will cover LAR 20 at some point. Of course, I'll cover LAR 20 when they make LAR 20. I think the next one is is it LAR 19? It's LAR 19. So the Snow White remake is going to be LAR 19. That's going to be beautiful. I'm sure that it's going to flop because I wasn't so sure about The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid did flop, fortunately. And obviously with Snow White, like Rachel Zegler has been out there doing her absolute best to completely trash this movie, and she's been doing a great job of it. So fair play to her.
I, I
She's
mean,
doing some good for the world. She's going to make this absolutely disgusting fucking
she,
plagiarist piece of shite flop, and I love it.
yeah, she's basically become the poster girl for career suicide because
Oh,
she
it's
has.
wonderful.
Yeah, because she has literally done everything in her power to make this movie sound as unappealing as humanly possible. And if this movie if this movie even gets made at this point, I'll be shocked
I
because
mean, it'll get made and they'll release it, but I suspect that it's going to flop hard, not just because of Zagler. I think um, the people have already they've already gotten sick of these stupid bloody Disney live action remakes. It was a nice little gimmick when they first came out. They thought, oh wow, I wonder how that's going to turn out, which is one of the reasons why the early movies did so well. It was a kind of morbid curiosity. But once people realized actually these things really suck, the audience has been going downhill. The Little Mermaid flopped. It didn't do anywhere near the numbers they thought it would. And you'll see the same thing with Snow White. It's going to flop too. People are just fucking sick of these dumb live action remakes from Disney.
well,
And
it
but
it
now that we have Rachel Zegler in there as well, she's such an unappealing personality, and people hate her. That, in addition to the fatigue with these stupid live actions, I think Snow White could be their first live action. It wouldn't be the first live action bomb. They had a couple of COVID bombs, but it would be lovely to see one of these movies not just flop but fucking bomb. I'd love to see that because
well,
I despise those Disney live action remakes. I'm not in any way objective about this. I am heavily biased. I fucking hate them, and I hope it bombs.
Well, it also doesn't exactly help that of all the movies, it's Snow White that is the one that they are basically bastardizing because that's literally the first I believe that was the first animated movie that Disney ever made. It was literally made by Walt Disney himself. He made that story specifically, and it was the thing that basically put Disney on the map and made them a household name. And you can tell, even if the animation is dated and the writing isn't that great, you can still see the love and passion behind the movie, even if it is a little old. It's hand drawn animation and made back in like the 50s. So there was a lot of time and effort put into it. So the fact that they are twisting and changing so much of the story and characters to fit their new mindset, it's basically like they dug up Walt Disney's grave and just started slapping and backhanding him over and over again while they're doing it because they are well past the point of just dancing on his grave. They are literally spitting on his grave at this point.
True. Nathan Malik says, Despot of Antrim, what do you think of anime in general since you've watched the Netflix adaptation of One Piece? I don't think about anime in general, to be perfectly honest, because I don't watch it. I've no problem with it. The only anime I watched was Dragon Ball Z. I'm actually wearing a Dragon Ball Z t-shirt, you can see. And I really liked Dragon Ball Z when I was a kid and rewatched it once as an adult. Really enjoyed it. I love the characters. Frieza was my favorite character, and I think the Frieza saga was just masterful. That was one of the. I mean, I don't know if the Frieza saga is thought of as one of the great anime sagas, but I just thought it was incredible from start to finish, and that's some of the best animated anything that I've seen. That was amazing. But other than that, I haven't watched much anime. It's probably something that I would get into in the future because I probably would enjoy it. Although something like One Piece, I mean, it's 1,000 episode long, and the reality is that I just would. There's no way I would be able to watch all of it. I just don't have time for that anymore. Um, I just don't, and it's not like, oh, I'm a very busy man, but
Well,
when you're married with a family and you got two jobs and you're trying to stay fit and you're trying to watch all this stuff for a YouTube channel, there's just no way I would get the One Piece anime. I would like to watch it though. I'll watch 10 or 12 episodes just to get an idea because I'm really interested. I'm doing it the opposite to how you're doing it, Cody. I'm looking at the live action thinking, wow, what did the anime look like and what would those characters look like in anime? So
Well,
I will watch some of the One Piece anime, but generally speaking, anime, I have no problem with it. I just have never seen much of it. I know you have, Cody, though. You're a huge fan of it.
oh yeah, I've been watching. I've literally been watching anime since I was 5 years old. I can still remember that my cousin at my aunt's wedding, he actually brought a couple of VHSs of some early Pokemon episodes, and I watched it, and I was amazed at the way the animation looks so different from like normal Western cartoons. And I've been watching anime ever since. And One Piece is definitely one of the series that I've come to love the most. And I could definitely recommend some key arcs that you'd probably to at least make it more digestible for you, so that you don't, if you want to get into it, or at the very least give it a try.
Yeah. All right. So Docbox says, "Hi Despot, can we suggest movies for you to review?" You could suggest them, but the reality is I probably wouldn't be able to get to them because I only release 2 videos a month. I bear in mind I'm a part-time YouTuber, not full-time, so I'm very limited in what I can cover. There's a lot of stuff that I want to cover that I just haven't been able to, and I have to skip a lot of topics. For example, I couldn't do a dedicated Mandalorian video. I don't know if I'll do a dedicated Ahsoka video. I might, but I have to be very selective in what I cover. So you could suggest them, but I don't know if I could get to them. And also propaganda. If you want to suggest some propaganda, you can do that because my last propaganda video did quite well, and I'm going to be releasing another one soon. And the next one I'm releasing, it's based on it was a subscriber sent me. Well, they actually commented on one of my propaganda analysis videos, and said, "Hey, you should cover this," and that's how I learned about it. So if you do want to suggest topics, suggest them, because if it weren't for that commenter last time, I don't know if I'd be making this next video, which I'm really enjoying. I think it's a fun video. I'll be putting it up on Sunday. It's a nice, fun piss take. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. All right, and let's see. Well, let's just go on to One Piece then. So, yeah, I'll briefly say what I thought about it. I thought One Piece was excellent. In fact, I think it's the only really, really good TV show of the year. I mean, shortly stated, I'm not going to go on one big long monologue right now, but shortly stated, it basically does everything right. It gets all of the fundamentals right. The characters are really fun, and you enjoy just spending time with them on screen. They're likable. Like, my God, that's something that Hollywood does not do well anymore. They're actually likable characters. The villains are very fun. The villains aren't overpowered. They all have weaknesses, but it does take the heroes a while to find out what those weaknesses are. And the heroes aren't, invincible and overpowered. They all have physical and personality flaws, which the bad guys regularly exploit. There's an overarching story. They're trying to get to the One Piece, but there's also these smaller, more interesting stories happening within that bigger arc. So, for example, Luffy's trying to build up his crew, and Zoro's trying to become the best swordsman in the world. Like, these are little, smaller arcs that are happening within the larger arc, and it all comes together very well. It looks beautiful. It's so gaudy, but it really just embraces the gaudiness and turns it up to 11, and it really makes it work. I just thought it was a terrific show. The other thing is there's just no fat on it. There's no padding. I mean, you can do a lot of comparisons between Ahsoka and One Piece, because a lot of what Ahsoka's doing wrong, One Piece is doing right, and one of them is just padding. Just these pointless, boring fucking scenes where Ahsoka or Sabine or somebody else is walking around doing nothing, and or they're in a training room for 5 minutes and they speak a few words and they do the same thing you've already seen them do 4 times. It's such a drawn out, over padded show, and One Piece is the total opposite. There is so much going on in One Piece, like all the time. More stuff happens in one episode of One Piece than the entire fucking season of Ahsoka. Like, One Piece is just packed, absolutely packed with interesting, fun stuff happening all the time. It is a massively entertaining show. I really loved it. What about you, Fan Without a Face? Now, just to be clear, the Fan Without a Face he's actually seen the entire anime and he's read the manga, but you can talk about that.
But yeah, I've been watching One Piece. Like I told you, I've been watching One Piece since it first came out back in the early 2000s with 4Kids Entertainment, the original dub. Anyone who's seen that knows about that. It's kind of infamous. I've watched pretty much every episode for the most part. I've read the manga. I've collected Funko Pops. I have DVDs. I've met voice actors. I've even helped with One Piece fan fictions on more than one occasion. So I feel like I'm pretty well versed on the series as a whole. So I definitely have a stronger opinions about this than some other people might. I'm not gonna bash the show like some people might expect me to. I can be objective about this, and I can talk about the show and give it its dues and its merits while also being critical because I am so versed on the show compared to some other people might be.
Yeah. Just briefly, Jorinoise Bulldozer. I hope I'm saying that right, Jorinoise. Or Gore Noise. Oh, yeah, Gore Noise, maybe. He gave me $2, so thank you very much. And he says, I'm curious about your thoughts on Strange World. I still haven't seen Strange World. It is on the list. I do want to watch it, and it's possible I would do a review of it. I would like to do a review. I would like to kind of bunch a lot of animation movies together and maybe make a 1 hour plus video about the current state of Disney animation. I would probably throw Pixar in there as well because it is Disney. And I would definitely talk about Strange World as part of that. So Strange World is something that I probably will get to eventually. We'll see. Yeah. And thank you again for the $2. All right. So yeah, when I was looking at the online reviews of One Piece, so I checked out Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, and I did read quite a few reviews. And one of the interesting things I noted is that the only people that really dislike this show, there's really only 2 people that actively dislike the show and think and hate it and think it's crap for whatever reason. And one of them are people who are angry that it's not diverse enough. I did see some of those.
Oh,
as crazy as that sounds. I've seen a few comments saying things like, "This is supposed to be a Japanese manga. Where are all the Japanese people?" So I'm sure Japan were delighted that they had these keyboard warriors fighting the good fight on their behalf. And and not just that, I think some people were angry that it wasn't politicized. I did see some comments like that. They were saying things like, "Oh my God, there's absolutely no LGBT representation here. This is just so normal. It's like this was made in the 50s."
Oh,
some people were I did see comments like that. People were angry that it wasn't just infused from top to bottom with their fucking ideology.
Well,
and no, we'll skip past that because I just briefly want to get onto the other reason. The main reason was that it was, and this was like over 90% of the negative reviews, it was fans of the anime. A lot of fans of the anime didn't like this live action adaptation because they were saying things like Luffy isn't right, he doesn't have the energy of Luffy, or it's the wrong actors, or it's not what I was expecting, or I'm very disappointed with how Arlong turned out, or this character or this character. They weren't happy with it, or they weren't happy with the world building, or they think that it was translated poorly into live action. But the vast majority of the negative reviews online came from fans of the anime. So why would they be unhappy about it?
Well, like you said, one of One Piece's most notable aspects is the fact that it's so long. It's over 1,000 chapters long, and it's still going, and it's probably going to keep going for at least another 5 years if what Oda said is anything to go by. And that can often be very disconcerting for people who want to try and get into it. Like you said, it requires a lot of time and dedication, and a lot of people don't have the time or just don't feel like it, so they write it off immediately. So that's one strength that this Netflix show has, is that it takes the entire East Blue saga, which is several arcs and like 100+ chapters and close to if I remember correctly, like 60 or so episodes, and compresses it into 8 episodes. So, so for a lot of people, it's a good gateway into the One Piece series, and it can maybe get them interested in the show as a whole, and maybe enough to pick up the manga or the anime, like you said. But the problem is that because they compress so much of the anime into 8 episodes, a lot, and I mean a lot of things are cut out. Like for example, the entire section at the restaurant, that's an entire arc that lasts for several episodes. There's a whole battle between another crew that we only barely see for like a minute and a half, who get wasted by Hawkeye Mihawk, the Krieg pirates. Several dozens of characters are either making appearances like a very brief cameo, or they're cut out completely. And a lot of other things are lost in translation, because One Piece has often been called one of the most difficult anime to ever adapt. That's a consistent thing I've seen throughout a lot of reviews of the live action series. And there's a lot of truth to it, because it's got a very zany, cartoonish energy to it that is seen pretty much right out of the starting gate. That's very, very difficult to translate into live action. And there's a lot of things that are lost in that translation because it's live action, due to the limitations of live action. Like, for example, like body types. And no, I don't mean like being fat and all that stuff. I mean, like, for example, Axe Hand Morgan, the main bad guy of like the first or second episode, in the live action show, he's a normal sized guy with a big axe on his hand, whereas in the anime, he's like 9 feet tall and built like a tank. So he's much more visually intimidating and a lot scarier looking, and the kind of guy who you could understand could intimidate an entire island full of people. That's actually something the live action show also kind of glosses over. He's much more clearly corrupt in the anime, where he regularly threatens people. He threatens his own men. He makes them spend hours, even days, building elaborate monuments to himself because he's so full of himself. And because he's so huge, you understand why people would be afraid of him. And so why it's more impressive when Luffy, who's like a normal sized guy with really skinny arms, in the anime also, he beats Axe Hand Morgan very easily in the anime and in the manga, whereas here it's more of a struggle. But that's a lot of stuff that's lost because because actors can only be so tall, and they can only do so much with the fight scenes and everything. So a lot of the combat's not as engaging, is not as fantastical as it is as in the anime. The character designs aren't as wacky as they can be, or as unusual as they can be. And the world of One Piece in the anime is also much more colorful, much brighter, much more visually interesting. Whereas here, it's a bit grungier looking. It's definitely brighter than some other Netflix shows I've seen, but it definitely feels a bit more Pirates of the Caribbean than One Piece. If you look at it, it makes a lot more sense when you've watched a few episodes of the anime, but that's at least part of it.
Right. Interesting. I mean, I understand the criticism. Why? But at the same time, their criticism is essentially, I don't like this show because it's not the show that I watched, which almost doesn't make sense to me. You already have the One Piece anime. It's right there. It's not going anywhere, and no one's changing it. But in the live action, as long as it's faithfully adopted and they're not pissing all over the characters like they do in Star Wars, where for example, they'll depict Lando Calrissian or Luke Skywalker, and it's not Lando and it's not Luke. It's just their modernist distortion of the character. That would be perfectly legitimate criticism. But if the only criticism is, I don't like it because this, and this isn't here, I wanted these story arcs out of my 1,000 episode anime, or I don't like it because the character doesn't look as bright or as big. That seems very, I would almost call it an illegitimate criticism, because what do you want? Like it's a live action adaptation. So of an anime that's 1,000 episodes long, it's not going to be an exact reproduction of it. It's just going to be it's not even doing anything new. As far as I'm aware, it's not necessarily a new take on One Piece. It's a reasonably faithful adaptation, and the guy who did the manga is in charge of this creatively. Ito, I can't remember his name.
Ichiro Oda.
Ichiro Oda. So Ichiro Oda is in charge. He's the creative mind behind this that created the manga. So it's faithfully adapted. It's just that they're leaving a lot of stuff out, and they're having to change some things as they translate it to live action. But it's not like they bastardized the material. It's not like they just what they did to Star Trek or what Disney does every single time they adopt something from the past, where they just take an absolute fucking wrecking ball to it. It's definitely not that.
No, and you're right, and that's one of the reasons why, unlike some other One Piece fans, I don't hate this show because I can see the legitimate passion behind this project. The sets, even if they're not exact, they at least look close enough to what they're supposed to look like in the live action in the anime, barring some slight differences, like how the Going Merry, for whatever reason, the figurehead at the front has an open mouth, whereas in the anime it doesn't have a mouth period, except for like one painted on. That just looks kind of weird, but whatever. And I've seen some of the behind the scenes stuff, like how I forget the guy's name, something Iragaki. I think that's the main actor, Luffy's name. He literally visited the headquarters where they make the One Piece manga and the anime, and he actually met with Oda and the voice actors for Luffy in the Japanese voice actors, and they literally told him to his face that they felt like he is Luffy personified, like he is Oda himself literally said to him that I can't imagine anyone else playing Luffy but you. And the guy gets teared up at that moment, and I can't help but respect that, because that's got to be like a dream come true moment for somebody. And the fact that Oda himself and that these guys show how much passion they have for this really helps. Like I mentioned, also the actor who plays Sanji, he could have just had a stunt guy do all the kicking scenes and everything, but no, he actually went through the effort of practicing and training himself to learn all kinds of martial arts moves and kicks, even though he doesn't have a martial arts background, so he could do his own stunts. It's really apparent that the guys who made this have a lot of passion for it and a lot of love for the source material, which is part of the reason why I can which is why I can respect it. And it's not the worst thing. It is not the worst thing that I have ever seen in my life, and I can definitely say it's pretty good. I just, I just don't think. I just think it's just okay. It's just between the two, I'll always pick the One Piece anime.
Yeah. Right. Well, there's a couple of questions I did want to ask you about the anime. So, have you seen, obviously turning anime into live action is very difficult. Is there a show, or have you seen a show where it's just better adapted than One Piece? Is there a better anime to live action adaptation than One Piece? Because if you complain about it, if you're an anime fan and you say, "Oh, I didn't like it," or I thought that it wasn't quite right. Well, okay, tell me what's an adaptation you did like that was from anime to live action.
I thought that Alita Battle Angel was a pretty good anime to live action adaptation, partially because I think at least partially because it had a bigger budget, so it was able to do a bit more of the fantastical stuff compared to the original. But I don't know, it felt more visually impressive, and they were able to get away with a lot more stuff, like because all the characters are CG cyborgs, they're able to move and fight and act in ways that feel a little bit more appropriate. That's something that's kind of lost with the live action version because of One Piece, because a lot of the characters fight in these really bizarre and crazy ways, and many of them are insanely strong and tough, which is harder to convey in live action. Probably one of the best examples would have to be with Zoro, who his main thing is he fights with three swords, with one of them being put into his mouth, which in the anime, that's easy to pull off. It's easy to make him fight like that without any issues, pull off all kinds of crazy maneuvers and everything with a big sword and with a big katana literally in between his teeth and talking with it in between his teeth. But in live action, while the actor does do that for a couple of scenes, he doesn't do it throughout most of the show. And I can understand why, because obviously it's borderline impossible to fight with three swords, much less with one in your mouth, which is, I feel like that's one of the issues with it being live action, is that it imposes certain limitations that kind of hinder some of the more crazy aspects that you can have in the anime without an issue.
Yeah. I'll just briefly go into the chat. So, Despot of Antrim, what do you think of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale novel and Hulu versions? If you watched it or read it, that is while we're on the topic of streaming shows. The Handmaid's Tale, I'm not going to lie, I haven't watched or read it. I have read basically synopsises of it, and it just sounds incredibly dumb to me. It's it's a show where the essentially the premise, if the entire selling point is the premise and the premise alone, that's pretty bad to me. And this is a world where there's very few women who can give birth, so all the women are captured by men and they're forced to give birth. And of course, it's become a trope which is used by abortion activists when they're protesting. So yeah, I nothing really draws me to the show. I think the premise is dumb as fuck, to be perfectly honest. I suppose it reminds me a little bit of Children of Men, but in such a world, this is fundamentally the problem for me. And in order for me to get into a show, I need to first of all accept the premise. So there's a show called Christ, what's it called? The Abyss, maybe? The Abyss. No, it's not The Abyss. That's that movie. It's I can't remember now, but it's a show. It's a sci-fi show, and it is about humanity who have colonized the entire solar system. And there are belters. There's people who live on the asteroid belt. They're called belters, and there's people who live on Mars. And then, of course, you have people back on Earth. And I just couldn't get into the show because I couldn't accept the premise. Fundamentally, I don't see why human beings would go out to live on these godforsaken rocks in the Expanse. Thank you, Joey Mob. I'm talking about the Expanse. So in the Expanse, you've got the belters and you've got people living on Mars and people living on Earth. And I just couldn't accept the premise, even though the show did look quite decent and the dialogue was good and the production design was good. I couldn't get into it because I felt there's no way that human beings will ever go to live in the asteroid belt because it sucks out there. Why would anyone want to move there? It's called technological determinism. The idea is that as this technology becomes available, human beings will automatically spread out almost like they're a bacteria or something. And it's not the reality. There's a reason no one lives in Antarctica. We could live in Antarctica. No one wants to go there because it sucks. Because, it would be very hard to live there, hard to grow food, and it would be expensive. All the food that you import from everywhere else would be obscenely expensive. It would be a very shit life. And it would be the same thing if even if the technology was there and you could go and live in a pod on Mars or something, no one would do it because why would you want to go and live on Mars? Even if people did go live on Mars, word would very quickly get out that this is terrible. No one else should come do it. I want to go home. That's what would be coming from the people who go to Mars. So I feel like humanity is never really going to leave Earth unless we come up with a technology that allows us to basically like wormhole technology that allows us to go to other planets very quickly. If our current understanding of transportation remains the same, whereby in order to go from point A to point B, you need to go through the space in between, we're never going to get off Earth. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to convince thousands of people to get on a spaceship for 300 years to go to the next planet that might or might not be habitable. So that was my problem with The Expanse. I couldn't accept the premise. And with The Handmaid's Tale, again, I just don't accept the premise. I think if you have a society where only a few women can give birth, that society just breaks down immediately. It's not going to be a society. It's going to be a post-apocalyptic nightmarescape because if you're going to hold very few women who can breed, but the vast majority of men are being told you do not have access to these women, you're going to create a situation whereby men will simply not accept that. And it's a recipe for constant rebellion, gangsterism, warlordism. The only thing you would really need to do to be a warlord is to say, I promise you, the men, breeding age women who can give you children, and you'll get a little army that'll follow you around. It wouldn't work. Like if that was the show, if the show was about how society breaks down in the aftermath of a fertility crisis, that would be interesting. But a show that suggests to me that you can have it both ways, and I'll talk about this a little bit later when I talk about Ahsoka. Bad world building because the writer wants to have it both ways. They want to have their ordered, super religious world where there's only a tiny amount of women, but they also want to have a world in which there are very few fertile women. It doesn't work. And also, if there was a world in which very few women were fertile, I don't see that people would necessarily want to follow religion. My understanding is that they're fundamentalist Christians in the show, but one of the premises of Christianity is family. In fact, one of the 10 Commandments is to be fruitful and produce children. And if that's not even possible, I think it would be it's almost a certainty that many Christians would just lose their faith in God. So, and none of that's just not on the table. It's just let's just accept that everyone's a fundamentalist moron that does not even question religion, even when it is demonstrated that they've essentially been abandoned by God. It sounds like shit to me. It's not something that I would watch. You know, I wish I could have said that in fewer words, but that's my answer. All right, let's move on to what is this is one thing I did want to ask about. Actually, you know what? Let's just go on to the main meat of One Piece. So this is why I love One Piece, because it gets all the fundamentals right. So the acting is is generally speaking, it's fantastic. I didn't see any characters who I thought, oh man, they cast her wrong or they cast him wrong. Everybody looked good on screen. I thought everybody was really bringing a lot of life to the character. And I don't know if it was necessarily well adapted, but what I was seeing on screen, I really enjoyed. I thought the acting generally was terrific. Cody, what do you think of the acting in One Piece?
I definitely didn't have any issues with the acting for the most part. The characters, they definitely had distinctive personalities. I always feel like that's something that's lost a lot with shows these days, is that the characters in a lot of shows seem to have very poorly defined personalities. There's not a lot that you can do to distinguish them from the others, but here they definitely got, for the most part, the core personalities of the characters right. Luffy is happy and goofy all the time. Sanji is a bit more suave and smooth. Zoro is more stoic, although admittedly at this point in the story he was a bit more lighthearted and cheerful. He would laugh and smile and goof around every now and again, but the core personalities there. The main different though, it's a little different with Nami, because she comes across as a lot more stern and serious
Yeah.
compared to the anime and the manga, where her main thing is that she is very sneaky and very clever and intelligent, but she's also a bit of a coward. She knows how to fight to an extent, but she is often more likely to either run in the other direction of a fight or find some way to talk her way out of it rather than throw hands with somebody, which that becomes a more relevant part of her character and her growth later on in the story, when she wants to be more involved, but she also knows that she isn't a superhuman like some of the other characters are, so she can't fight as hard. And I thought Usopp was okay. I do feel like he wasn't as funny as he is in the anime and manga, because being a screaming coward who runs away constantly is a big part of his personality. But I thought the acting was fine for the most part. I definitely didn't feel like they were doing a bad job, or that anyone was that miscast. Although I have to admit, having some of the characters have distinctive accents was a little distracting, because it actually reminded me a lot of the 4Kids version of the anime, where almost every character except for the main ones was given a thick, noticeable accent for some reason. Usually
Yeah.
it was
Go ahead.
Usually it was kind of funny and on the nose accents, like Shanks, the guy with red hair. He was given an Irish accent, or I think it was Scottish. And then you had Sanji. He was given a Brooklyn accent for some reason. That's like something fans like to laugh about nowadays. And it's funny because that was the thing that a lot of people complained about with the old dub. So I find it kind of funny that they did that now. I don't know if that was intentional or if it was just they felt that the actors who they cast were the best guys for the job, and the accents were just something they couldn't work around. I don't know for sure. It's a little distracting, especially with Luffy's actor, because his voice is very scratchy kind of sounding, especially with the accent. Whereas in the anime and in the anime, both Japanese and the English version, his voice is more high pitched and playful sounding. But otherwise, I've got no complaints really.
Yeah, I mean, the accent thing, I felt that it fit quite well into the production design and the overall artistic aesthetic of the show, because you have neon lights at the same time that a guy's walking around in a peg leg. You've got all this anachronistic shit going on. You have electricity, but you also have lit candles, and like it's crazy. You've got all of this technology that doesn't belong in the same time period, just all thrown together. You have modern hairstyles, like modern, almost like manga hairstyles, and the kind of thing that you would see at a cosplay, people walking around as if they're at a cosplay. At the same time, you've got people who look like real pirates, and you've got people who look like they're from the 1920s. It's just crazy, and they've just embraced the craziness. And I think all these different accents that don't really make sense together fit quite nicely into that. It's important to remember that to an extent, the one I haven't seen the anime, like I said, but it seems to me that with the live action, they're embracing a degree of absurdist, almost surreal on-screen visual portrayal of this world. And because by embracing that, I love it. I think it makes sense because nothing makes sense. Like, if as long as everything doesn't make sense and everything is inconsistently in the same way, it kind of there's a paradoxically it makes sense, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's actually kind of funny you mention that, because the East Blue Saga is actually the most grounded and normal of all the One Piece sagas, because once they get to the Grand Line, things get crazier and crazier, and the technology gets crazier. It's basically like Oda. One thing that makes Oda such a fun guy to read for, because is that there's basically nothing that is too insane or out there that he won't put into One Piece. He's got islands where they're perpetually one season, like a winter island or a summer island. You've got an island that's literally made out of food. Another one that's a giant plant that literally eats anything that comes near it. You've got islands made out of clouds. You've got islands where lightning strikes every single second of the day. And you've got animal people, fish people, mermen, giants. There is angels. There is literally nothing. If he can find some way to fit it into the world of One Piece, then he will do it. And that's part of what makes it so charming. It's a lot kind of like, if I was to compare it to anything, I'd compare it kind of like to Lord of the Rings, because Oda makes this world and gives it so much personality, so many different cultures, so many different races, worlds, islands, and history to it. You can tell that this guy loves the series that he's making, and he's putting so much passion and work into it that it's honestly amazing and admirable. And that's part of the reason why I was worried about this, because I didn't want to see this live action series do it poorly, you know?
Yeah. And I'll wrap up One Piece, but briefly, I did want to say that if you were a Hollywood producer or something, or you're making a TV show, like, just watch One Piece to see how, when just fundamentals done right, good storytelling, action and consequence, and my God, Lucasfilm could learn so much from this. Your main protagonists, the good guys, they're not massively overpowered for a start. Just because she's a woman, just because Nami is a woman, doesn't mean that she's massively overpowered. We do see her get her ass kicked. Everybody gets their ass kicked in this, right? And Nami has serious character flaws, and she is tricked essentially by Arlong, and she allows herself to, and she's quite naive to have ever believed Arlong in the first place. And she's not a very good fighter. Like, in the show, I know there's a little bit of girl boss kind of choreography in there, but at the same time, it's anime adapted to live action, so there's going to be that hyper realistic aspect to it. But she's really not a girl boss just going around kicking everybody's ass. She can be subdued quite easily. And when you have the villains in this show are really interesting, fun, enjoyable villains, but they all have weaknesses which can be exploited. It's not just like, oh, the villain is strong, so I have to have a training montage and get stronger, and then I can defeat the villain. No, it's about using your head and figuring out what the villain's weakness is and exploiting it. So, for example, with the clown, you have, what's the name? What's the name of the clown?
Buggy the clown.
So Buggy the clown, when I was watching the show, I was thinking, man, how are they going to beat him? Because they can't cut him. They can't cut him. They can't cut off any of his limbs or anything, because he's a superhuman. It's just going to come right back onto him. He has the ability to break himself down into his constituent parts and do whatever he wants with those parts. So he can remove his hand and send it flying at you. And I was thinking, how the hell are they going to beat him? And in the end, it was a very simple solution. I'll not say what it is in case there are people watching this who don't want the show spoiled, but it was like that with the other villains. It's almost like they need to find the key to defeat the villain. And when they do find that, they exploit it very aggressively. Really fun. But you look at something that actually made me think of the Disney Star Wars trilogy. Generally speaking, when Rey needed to defeat one of the bad guys, she just went, "Aah!" and she would hit him really hard with the lightsaber. And if that didn't work, she'd hit him even harder. And if that didn't work, she'd screw up her face and she'd go, "Ah!" and she'd do it really hard. And then that would work. And it's so fucking dumb. It's like, Jesus Christ, brute force, brute strength, just being the strongest guy in the room with the biggest lightsaber swing isn't how this is supposed to work. There's supposed to be some, strategy and tactics and using your head involved. And that's what I really enjoyed about One Piece when they were even when they were fighting as physical and fun as the fighting was. A lot of the victory came from using their head, actually being smart, figuring out the right tactic or strategy. Wolf Council says bitch rage. That is essentially correct. Yes. So Rey would she would overdose on her force power of bitch rage, and that would win her the fight. It was garbage. And that's not just that the DST, the Disney trilogy. It's basically anything that Disney does now. They're so bereft of creative ideas and they don't even get the fundamentals right. But if you watch One Piece, you look at how the protagonists have little weaknesses and how they all have personality flaws. Look at how the villains are not super overpowered, but they do all have weaknesses that are at first hard to spot. Actions have consequences. The world building is coherent. The characters, just because he's a white man doesn't mean that he's super evil or that he needs to be, destroyed and killed off screen. Like, you looked at even the first episode of Ahsoka, the first white guy you see is this really dumb, arrogant, blustery captain or ship captain who wants to show off. And of course, he's dead within 5 minutes. It's almost like you would want to sit everyone at Disney down and say, okay, watch this and take notes, because it just does everything right. It gets all the fundamentals right. It's not doing anything absolutely insanely off the wall, original or crazy, apart from, of course, the manga itself is that, but it's just doing that. It's getting the fundamentals right. And that's something that Hollywood doesn't do anymore.
And yeah, that's very true to the manga itself. Luffy is very powerful, physically strong himself, but he's also modest enough to admit that he can't do everything himself. In the Arlong arc, he flat out says that he can't navigate, he can't swing a sword, he can't cook, he can't do anything. He knows that he needs his friends to help him to prevail to become king of the pirates. And all the characters of the Straw Hat Pirates, they all have a role to play in the crew, and they all trust each other, and they all acknowledge that they need each other to help them out when they need to. And they are more than happy to call upon their friends to help them in a fight if they need it. That's the thing that makes them such a likable group of characters, is because they have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, and they're willing to admit to them.
Yeah. By the way, RRTNZ sent me $2 and says, "Heal Despot and go Ireland in the Rugby World Cup. Cheers." Thank you very much, RRTNZ. I appreciate that. Yeah, you're right about how the characters complementing each other is important, because if you look at, again, for example, Ahsoka, or really any Star Wars show, the characters don't complement each other. Generally, how they do it is they have a deconstructed male and he sucks, but then the female's really awesome and she's just great at everything, and she shows how the guy's doing everything wrong. Even in Solo, for example, at the end, Hand had to be rescued by his ex-girlfriend. Anyway, so when characters are actually complementing each other, like, for example, Zoro is really good at sword fighting. He's the best fighter. And Sanji is a really good cook, but he can also fight a bit. And he's got some good personality. He can take a joke and he can help cheer people up. And like you said, Nami is the navigator, and then Luffy can fight, but it's almost like Luffy's superpower isn't really his stretchiness. It's his personality. He's able to infuse everyone with this enthusiasm and this belief that they can do it. Everyone has their own very clear role within that group, and they complement the group in very specific, clear ways. And that's very important when you have a coherent group on screen, like a group of, in this case, not really superheroes, but characters. They have to complement each other. I was watching Suicide Squad the other night, and it was the original one. They did Suicide Squad and the Suicide Squad, so it was the one with Jared Leto playing Joker, and so I was watching that, and one thing I noticed is that there's really no reason to suppose that these people would complement each other very well, because, for example, what does Harley Quinn do? She runs around with a bat and she hits people with it, and that's about it. And it's like, why don't you just have a guy with a gun? Or kill shot. So Will Smith's character can kill anyone with one shot. And it's like, why don't you just hire a marksman from the military? And Crocodile, what does he do? He jumps on creatures and bites them. And it's like, why don't you just use a guy with, like, there's absolutely no way that they don't complement each other in any meaningful way. It's almost like it's trying to take the Ocean's 11 concept and transplant it into the superhero world, but it didn't work because these people just didn't need to be there. They didn't complement each other particularly. They didn't work very well as a coherent group. It's just, oh, this guy's kind of weird and he looks cool and he can, do a strange thing. Let's just take him and put him in the group. And there was no real reason for any of them to be there, no specific reason. Like there was one guy in that movie, oh, he's the best safecracker in the world. He never used that skill in the entire movie. He never did it. It's fuck me, that's a bad movie.
Yeah, that's one thing that One Piece really does well because it focuses a lot on the whole sailing aspect. Several arcs address how sailing without certain people in the crew, a doctor, a cook, a navigator, and all that sort of thing, and a shipwright, those all become relevant plot points. The characters all have a role to fill on the ship besides fighting and such. They have an actual job on the ship, so they complement each other because they all need to be together in order for them to be one cohesive unit, because this story is a grand epic. You need a large group of people with specific skills to pull things off in the end. And what also helps is that the characters gradually grow to like each other, and you in turn grow to like them yourself. And that's also what makes all the emotional moments in the story much more heartbreaking and also more uplifting, and makes you feel more for them when they win, makes you feel more when they win, and it makes you hurt more when they fail. It really works.
Exactly. And the one more thing I'll say about One Piece is that you actually like spending time with these characters. Like you said, when they win, you feel that victory, and when they lose, it does hurt. You have an emotional connection with the characters on screen. They're really likable and they're fun to spend time with. Now, we're going to be talking about Ahsoka next. And when I was watching Ahsoka, man, it was a fucking drag because I just did not want to spend any time with these characters. They are so fucking boring that I didn't want to be there. They were a drag. They were dragging me down. They're not fun. They're not funny. They're not entertaining. They're not wacky or idiosyncratic or enjoyable in any way. They're just fucking boring. I mean, I know I'm not trying to sound like a thesaurus here. I'm not trying to be over clever about this. Sometimes the best tool is a hammer. So when describing Ahsoka, here's the hammer. It's fucking boring.
Yeah, that I feel like that's basically the same issue with basically every live action Disney Star Wars show that's come out. Almost every character acts like a plank of wood, and they've got a stick shoved somewhere up their butt, because they always have the same blank wooden expression on their face. They never emote that much. Their voice never goes above a certain octave, and that's especially insulting for Ahsoka, because if you watch the Clone Wars, and to an extent the Rebels cartoon shows, she's a very emotive character. She's fun, she's snarky, she can tell jokes, she can laugh, she can smile. She certainly doesn't act like Rosario Dawson does in this, with the same blank stone cold expression on her face. That it really reminds me of how the prequels were, at least for some of the Jedi where they all acted so stone-faced and emotionless, which was, ironically enough, a criticism everyone always had of George Lucas's acting direction for characters.
Yeah, before we continue, James Girassa has given me $20, so thank you very much, James. And he says, even if you fire everyone in the entertainment business, you have even more woke people waiting to take their place. The demographic that created Hollywood and has been erased. Do you have a more optimistic take? I don't, to be perfectly honest. I think that if you were to fire everyone in Hollywood, if you're going to replace them, you would need to replace them with older people. Basically, people in their 50s and 60s who have experience working in the industry. So obviously you're going to need some experience if you're going to do genuinely good stuff. But any younger than that, and the chance that they're woke goes way up. So you would need, apparently this is actually a problem that a lot of experienced writers were having. I think I heard about this on Doomcock's channel. In one of his videos, he was saying that a lot of writers, they're saying basically what happens is they have a script and they're quite happy with it. Then they'll go into a Hollywood writer's room and then they have to sit there and watch while 3 or 4 younger woke morons just go to town on their script and say, oh, we have to have this, or we have to have some representation, oh, we have to, we should include this group, and what is this really saying about women's role in society? And they have to sit there and watch these fucking morons tear their script apart, and there's really nothing they can do about it. So apparently that's been happening quite a lot. What you need to do is get rid of all those younger idiots and just let the older, experienced guys that understand that injecting politics into everything is not what audiences want to see. Just let them do their job. But with these, that's even less likely now after the strikes with these writers' minimums. So one of the agreements that they came to is that in a lot of cases, shows will have to have a minimum number of writers. And it depends on the show, and it can be done a bunch of different ways. But fundamentally, what that means is I won't even say there's more cooks to spoil the broth. It's just more like that there's more woke morons to poison the broth. And now that they have these minimums, so yeah, I'm not very optimistic that they can get rid of them. And like you said, if Hollywood did, let's say Disney's a perfect example of this. Disney is filled from top to bottom, from skin to bone. They are absolutely, completely infested with these completely propagandized, brainwashed idiots that have gone through the American education system. They've gone through the college system, and they're completely convinced that their ideology is the way. And they go into Disney and they bring all of their ideas with them. And that's probably most Disney employees now, certainly within the creative realms of Disney. So if they fired everyone and replaced them, they're probably just going to be replacing them with more of the same at this stage. The brainwashing has been so astoundingly successful, like the public education system brainwashing. I mean, not to invoke a leftist, but Noam Chomsky probably said it best. He said, the education system is not a system for educating people. It's a system of enforced ignorance, which is kind of true. I've been a teacher for over a decade, and the education system from what I've studied in the United States, it's pretty abysmal. And even when I look at like some of the videos you see online of a guy walking around a college campus talking to people, asking them, what was the date of Pearl Harbor, or can you name basically anything from the Constitution? Like what do you think is the most important part of the Constitution? They're complete and utter morons. They don't know anything, but they do know this ideology that they're supposed to know. That's what they know. They know the woke ideology. So are these people from that generation really going to come in and save Hollywood? No. So yes, James Garassa, I believe you're right. I really don't see much hope for Hollywood in the future. I think the only hope at the minute is coming from indie movies. The only good movies I really like anymore are indie. So this year, there's only been a few good movies. Tetris was good. Blackberry was good. To be fair, Mission Impossible was a good movie. Although, it's kind of just an upscaled version of stuff you've seen before. It was the same last year. Last year, Tar, very good movie. Banshees of Inisherin, great movie. And Everything Everywhere All at Once, really good movie. Those 3 movies, they're all indie. So all of the best stuff, there are still good movies coming out, but almost never from Hollywood. It's all indie stuff. And it's because they can get away from all of the politicized nonsense in Hollywood and actually just work on the product and make something really good. So in terms of the future, I would like to see Hollywood collapse, because it means that people would then be free to pursue independent projects without having to adhere to the paradigm of woke. And then you would see good stuff. But as long as that beast is intact, I just don't, for the foreseeable future, I don't think they're going to be able to produce anything good. All right, so let's move on to, we've been talking about Ahsoka a little bit. So, yeah, Ahsoka, like you said, boring. Rosario Dawson, very boring. And there's one scene that I want to talk about. So Rosario Dawson and so Ahsoka and Sabine, her apprentice, are on a ship, and then their droid is attacked. Now, conveniently, the droid that is attacking that droid waits until the droid has finished his mechanical operations fixing the ship, and only then does he attack him. There's a lot of contrived scene logistics here. So you've got that little battle, and then Ahsoka and Sabine run outside, and they engage in a battle, and they kill about a dozen bad guys, in a minute, without either of them being injured or wounded or at all inconvenienced in any way. And it really doesn't seem like it took that much effort for them to kill these dozen or so men that creeped up on their ship in the woods. Now, after they do this, you look at their faces, and there's not a bead of sweat. They're not panting for breath as if they've just been in a fight for their lives. They don't seem at all concerned. They've just got these dull, placid expressions, and they're like, yeah, okay, well, That was a thing that happened. And then they walk off into the forest, and I'm thinking, were they not just in an existential battle? Were they not just fighting for their lives? Did they not just kill 12 guys? And they're just sitting there with these dull, bored wooden plank expressions. And I'm also thinking, aren't you worried that there might be more guys in the woods, like in the immediate vicinity? Don't you want to check that those guys are actually dead? Because if any one of them wakes up, your ship is right there. Aren't you worried that maybe that's just the first wave and that more are coming? Aren't you worried that one of them got on the talkie and told more of them to come in? But no, none of this is considered. They just run off into the woods. It's astoundingly stupid. And the action on screen is never accurately and properly reflected in the looks on the characters' faces. It's just looks like a bunch of bored actors standing in a green screen. It's fucking abysmal.
It definitely. I noticed that too. They always, like, when we saw Rosario Dawson for the first time as Ahsoka in The Mandalorian season 2. From like the first, I thought I had mixed feelings about it because Ahsoka is one of my favorite Star Wars characters. So I was very unhappy about the idea of seeing her in live action because past experience told me it was going to be bad, and I actually, part of me kind of hoped that, and her having a different voice from the VA from the original show also takes you out of it. But regardless, when I saw her for the first time, I thought, that's not Ahsoka. That's a lady who looks like Ahsoka, and she's got the same lightsabers, but she doesn't act like Ahsoka. Where's the playful banter? Where's the jokes? Where's the jovial attitude? Part of what made Ahsoka such a fun character was how different she was from the standard Jedi. She didn't act with that whole emotional detachment thing. She was emotional. She was expressive. She reacted to stuff. In one of the episodes of the Clone Wars, when she leads a fighter squad to take out an enemy ship, she loses a couple of her men because of her own reckless actions, and she looks completely destroyed by it. She looks heartbroken and sad that she made that mistake, and you can see it all over her face, even though it's animated and everything. But here, her expression almost never changes, whether she's in a fight, having a conversation. Sure, she smiles a little bit, like her lips go up like a centimeter or two. But for the most part, she just stands there with that same blank expression. And I'm just wondering what the direction is here. Is she supposed to be subdued, withdrawn? Are they going for like a Zen master kind of thing? Like
they are, yeah. I think they're going for a kind of, you put it very well, like a Zen master, or almost like a Clint Eastwood type character, that they want to go for. They basically want her to have male gravitas, which she doesn't. She just looks bored. And they want her to be the stoic warrior, the warrior monk type. And I don't know why, because it just doesn't bloody work for her. She just looks bored, and she's boring me. It's boring for me to look at her.
Yeah, it's weird because if they wanted to go for the whole warrior monk thing, that's basically Obi-Wan Kenobi's thing, or at least older Obi-Wan Kenobi with a little bit of snark. But Ahsoka is not the quiet Zen master who barely emotes. She, even when she gets older in the Rebels show, she's still pretty snarky and funny from time to time. And Sabine's even worse because she's basically she
started on Sabine.
Yeah, because in Rebels she's basically a rebel, like in the most literal sense. She dyes her hair crazy. She draws graffiti all over stuff. She's loud. She states her opinion on anything and everything. She likes blowing stuff up, shooting guns, painting stuff crazy colors. She is about as emotive as you can possibly get. And in this, she's flat. It's like she's going through an emo phase or something, because
yeah, she kind of reminds me of a vaguely depressed 15-year-old who, like you say, is going through an emo phase or whatever the modern equivalent is, which I suppose would be trans. But yeah, that's what it seems to me. It just seems like a bored, depressed, vaguely angry teenager that prefers to stay quiet because it makes her appear profound and intelligent. But actually, she's doing this because the second she opens her mouth, you realize what an absolute moron she is.
And it's like that for all the characters. And if you watch the animated shows, when you see them in live action, you don't feel excited because you're seeing them brought to life. You feel depressed because that's not my character. That's a cosplayer pretending to be the
Yeah,
character.
they're essentially cosplayers. If you've seen the show, and I've seen a little bit of it, although it was a few years ago, I've forgotten most of it. But I enjoyed it more or less. I thought it was a bit kiddie for me, but still thought it was fun enough. And the characters that I'm seeing on screen, you've put it very well. They're basically just, it feels more like they're cosplaying because, and here's the other thing. You say, oh well, it's not the character that I saw, but here's the other thing. They're not they're barely even characters. Where's the personality? I mean, to bring it back to One Piece, every one of those characters is infused with personality and very recognizable personality. So you know that Zoro's kind of a stoic, but you can break down those walls and get to the heart of the man with a bit of effort. And then Luffy is just this ball of energy bouncing everywhere. And they have these very distinct, very strong personalities. But you look at Ahsoka, and they don't have any personality. Ahsoka is just bored looking, and then Sabine is mostly kind of just bored looking and walks around, and she wants to get to Ezra. And it's like, what do these people enjoy? What do they like? What do they dislike? What are they interested in? What are their vices? What does their personality drive them to in terms of their conversation or the people they gravitate towards? There's absolutely nothing here. They're just not. They're barely. The characterization is almost completely absent in this show.
It's kind of funny because you would say you almost want to say they're almost robotic, except ironically enough, the droids in some of the shows and movies actually have more personality than they do. I mean, going back to your your solo review when you talked about Phoebe Waller-Bridge, she had a personality. It was an annoying personality, and I was happy when she got shot, but she had a personality. These characters, they don't have personality. It's stoic and calm. And then there's stoic and calm. And then there's Hera. She's stoic and calm. Yeah. And then you've got the witch, and then then that one Sith lady. And then I don't understand what exactly the idea is behind this, because the Clone Wars cartoon and the Clone War and the video game Jedi Survivor, their characters have personalities. They act like they give a damn. But here, none of these people act like they care. I thought maybe it was like because some of them are covered in heavy makeup, but even the characters whose entire costume consists mostly of just like painted hair or a wig can't be bothered to act like they care. It's like they took, like with the sequels where everyone overacted, and they went in the opposite direction. Now, instead of overacting, they're underacting. They are barely acting. I've seen cosplayers who actually put more effort into their performance than these guys do, and they're the ones getting paid millions of dollars to do this.
Yeah. Before we go on, I want to talk to the chat a little bit. So Yata says, love your channel, Despot. Watched everything since I found your channel. Just wondering what was the backstory behind Karen iPhone. Cheers. Yeah, Karen iPhone is from a video game called Cruelty Squad. She is the taskmaster. Well, actually, in the Cruelty Squad, it's in my channel, it's she's a she, but in Cruelty Squad, she's the taskmaster, and she gives missions to to you. It's a first person shooter. She doesn't speak or anything. It's just a little avatar that moves its mouth up and down, and then the words appear in text. And I just thought it was so hilariously hideous that I would adopt it as a mascot. And I originally called her Karen Iathon, but everyone thought I was saying Karen iPhone, and they were writing that in the comments. And I thought, oh, wow, that's way better. So I changed her name to Karen iPhone, and she continues to be a faithful mascot. I hope one day to make a Karen iPhone plushie. That would be really fun.
Yeah. That would be pretty funny, although I'm wondering if you'd maybe get in trouble for copyright issues.
I'll change. I mean, I always give her different hair or a different hat, or change the design or something. And also, it's such a like a small wee YouTube channel using an obscure image from a video game. I doubt you'd have any problem with copyright.
You should also do like a stylized version of Reflection of Myself guy too.
I'd love that, man. I'd love to have my boy Reflection as well, to get like a plushie. But the problem there is that now you're using the likeness of an actual human being. Now you could get in trouble.
Yeah, it's too bad because that whole like the reflection on myself, reflection on myself, reflection on myself. that loop when you loop that, it's just so funny because
It's hilarious because like it's real. It's like this person actually believes they shite.
and I wonder if the guy is looking back on that video interview now and thinking, "Wow, I was so full of myself back then."
Yeah, it's like how could you not though? How could if that guy were to look at that episode of that TV show now? And by the way, anyone, if you want to know what I'm talking about, it's my Netflix has been poisoned by wokeness. Just type in Netflix woke despot and you'll get the video. It's a video I did about Netflix, and this guy comes up and he's Mr. Reflection. That's where I got him from. And he's just one of the most insufferable wankers you'll ever see in your life. The shite he comes out with is just makes your ears bleed. And I don't see how that person, looking back at the show, couldn't think to himself, "My God, I am just unbearable." Like it must have been an epiphany for him when he watched that episode back and realized just what an absolute, just mess of a human being he is.
You know, one thing you could do with the whole reflection of myself thing is just like get a pic, make a stylized design or something of like of a different version of him, like his face is a mirror, and then just play the reflection of myself like audio file over that, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah,
about a copyright thing.
All right, so let's move on. Briefly, there was one more comment I wanted to read. Hey Despot, Teddy O says, "Hey Despot, I was extremely happy to discover you a few months back. Love all your videos and hope you get to do more live streams. Hope to see you on Friday Night Tights soon." Yeah, thanks very much, man. I appreciate that, and thanks very much for watching the videos. I do enjoy the live streams. It's quite a bit of preparation, but I do enjoy them. All right, so let's go. We're still talking about Ahsoka. The other thing I didn't like about Ahsoka, and this is very typical of Disney Lucasfilm, the characters are sexless. Every single woman that appears in a Disney Lucasfilm production is completely sexist. Now, I'm not saying they need to take off their clothes and fuck on camera. I don't want a porn movie, but at least at least when George Lucas was making it, there was some acknowledgement of the fact that men and women actually find each other attractive. Like the first thing Luke says about Leia is, "Oh, she's beautiful," and it's obvious that Leia is attracted to Han Solo. And then in Empire, you see them kiss and grow closer together. There's actually a sense that humans are attracted to each other, men and women. And in these stupid bloody Disney shows, it's just non-existent. Like, oh man, it was so cringe when Sabine went and met her friend Ezra in the gypsy camp, and they hug and he's her bestie, and it was so fucking millennial. I could do an episode just talking about how that one reunion of Ezra and Sabine, how just that one scene speaks to a lot of what is wrong with modern entertainment. It's briefly stated, it's millennialism. It's millennial culture. You look at Ezra's personality, he's super millennial. You look at Sabine's personality, she's super millennial. They don't feel like they're from a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. They just feel like someone you would meet in a college, just a boring kid with not much personality who's never read a book. Maybe they read Harry Potter, and they're afraid to offend anyone, so their idea of humor is self-deprecation. It's absolutely insufferable, and that scene was terrible. But basically, what I'm getting at is that the women in this are absolutely, completely asexual, and everyone is like that, and it just sucks. It's so boring. It drags you into this kind of uncanny valley. It's like, what the hell am I looking at?
It's funny you mentioned that whole they look like millennials, because when you really mention it like that, they really do. Sabine, who in the animated show, you could tell she was a girl. She looked like it. She wore like modified female Mandalorian armor and all the colorful clothes and everything. And she had somewhat long hair, but now she's practically shaved her head to be as like androgynous as humanly possible with the hair dye and everything too, and she just acts so borderline emotionless like a robot. And then you've got Ezra with the hobo beard and the straw looking clothing and everything. He looks like a modern day hippie. He kind of reminds me of that Berkeley guy from Zombieland 2.
Yeah,
it is kind of ridiculous how Also, like you said, that female characters are not basically all have to be these stoic, not stoic characters who aren't allowed to feel anything except stoicism and everything. It really does suck a lot of the personality out of them. Like going back to Nami, for example, one thing she was fine with doing was using her. She could show off her sexuality to people. She'd use that from time to time. And you also had Sanji as a character who would be happy to show that he was attracted. He was attracted to women all the time. That was something that was a part of his character. Whereas here, if you made them robots, there'd be almost no difference between them.
Yeah, that's actually true. In fact, the robot is probably the most likable character in the show.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's voiced by he's voiced by shoot, what's his name again? I'm not
I'll quickly look it up. So Ahsoka cast robot. David Tennant.
Yeah, David Tennant. That guy is very hard. That guy is known for playing very active and characters who just ooze with personality. And plus, he's playing basically the same character he did in the Clone Wars cartoon. Where even there he was snarky. He was snarky but intelligent, and always seemed to have a wise crack for any situation, which was always fun. And I feel like it really says a lot that they have an easier time making the robot act more human, or at least more alive, whereas all the living characters act like robots.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about, I've actually got a good challenge here. So RRTNZ says, try starting a sentence with, the thing I liked most about Ahsoka was, without mentioning Ray Stevenson, it is not easy. That show makes so little sense it could be written in crayon. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Ray Stevenson, even his character, the way his character is written is kind of boring, but Ray Stevenson infuses it with so much personality that it's actually kind of enjoyable to watch. He's the only character on screen that I'm enjoying, and it was a great performance. It's actually quite rare that an actor's last performance is good. Their career tends to tail off, but unfortunately, he died of a heart attack at the age of 59. But he was really good. Other than that, if I'm going to be as far as I can to the show, what do I like about it? I thought Thrawn, I'll say this, Thrawn didn't really look like Thrawn because he was too out of shape and he was a little bit too old, I felt. I mean, the age wasn't a big deal, to be honest. Maybe he's that age. I would have liked him to have looked a little bit younger, like just a little. You can kind of see the wrinkles in the face, and he does look. Maybe it's an age thing, or just the actor, is a bit out of shape. I also felt that the whole pear body, the pear-shaped body, it didn't feel like Thrawn to me because it's like I've read Thrawn. I've read Thrawn. It's called Star Wars Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. And that's quite a good book, and that really introduces you to the character well, and that's his origin story. And I've read that, and Heir to the Empire I'm reading at the minute. And you get a very good sense of who Thrawn is, and he doesn't strike me as someone who would let himself go. So I think physically, it's not that convincing. But I will say that Lars Mikkelsen he's good. He's a good actor, and I think he's doing quite a good job with Thrawn. And I would also say that the depiction of Thrawn, in terms of they're depicting him as a very strategic thinker, someone who is always trying to remain one step ahead of his enemy, and someone who is always taking as much into account as possible before he formulates a decision, who's very articulate. That's there. So the characterization of Thrawn is actually not bad, I would say. I think visually they could have done a better job, but the characterization of Thrawn I thought was decent. Cody, what did you think?
I agree with you. I think Thrawn's performance overall is probably one of the only good things in this, partially because of the aura that he gives off. Even if he is a little bit out of shape, when he speaks and when he moves and when he just talks and acts, you believe that this guy is intelligent. You believe that this is a guy who is a genuinely gifted tactician and an intelligent planner, somebody who could, in theory, actually pose a threat, even though he doesn't have force powers or some kind of super weapon, which is something I always feel like a lot of characters have lacked in most Star Wars media these days. That we're told we're supposed to feel a certain way about them, but we never really get that feeling from them. And I guess if there was another thing, I thought it was kind of cool to see some of the Clone Wars stuff in live action, seeing Rex in live action in his armor, and getting to see getting to see Hayden Christensen play Anakin Skywalker again, this time with his Clone Wars look. You definitely can tell that he's at least trying a bit harder to give a better performance, which I think is admirable. And I think it's kind of nice that he got a chance to basically do a sort of do-over, even if I still prefer the animated Clone Wars Anakin. I still thought he did an okay job, but I definitely do not want them to make a live-action Clone Wars show, because it will be vastly inferior to the animated one, and it will just, and I imagine they'll probably make Ahsoka somehow more like as insufferable as everyone thought she was going to be in like the first 2 seasons
Yeah.
of the show.
So he'll chat if you want to put in your thoughts about Ahsoka. Now's the time, because I'm gonna read through a list of plot holes. So while I'm reading through that, feel free to write your ideas about your thoughts about Ahsoka, and we will endeavor to respond to them. Before I do, RRTNZ has given me 5 Kiwi dollars. Thank you very much, RRTNZ. And he says, the show is nonsense. Ezra, I don't need weapon. Oh man, the cringe. Ezra, I don't need weapons. Picks up a blaster and kills Trooper. Yeah, he says, I don't need weapons. The Force is my ally. And he starts fighting the bad guys. Thrawn must control all the variables. Let Sabine go, Bond villain. Yeah, so, God, you do get that sense of what the hell is going on here. Now, the basically Dave Filoni, his excuse for Thrawn letting Sabine go is that Thrawn says, oh, well, Balon Skull made her a promise to meet Ezra, so I'm going to honor that promise, and Thrawn is honorable. So maybe you can get away with that, but I don't see why he needs to let her go on her own. Just give her a drop ship, and she can go and meet Ezra, and you can keep her under control, and you can keep her survey. That's much more Thrawn. Thrawn wouldn't want Sabine running off on her own unless he had a very specific reason, like he was trying to bait someone with Sabine. Maybe he was trying to bait Ezra, but I really don't know much about Ezra at this stage. But yeah, that you could argue that that's a bit of almost like a character plot hole for Thrawn. Bond villain. He does have kind of a Bond villain air about him, Thrawn, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because most Bond villains are excellent. And they're I mean, like Bond's another series that certainly I would say Marvel or DC could learn a ton from Bond. Like, why is Bond still relevant, even though its first movie, I think, was 1962? Doctor No, it's still relevant because they never oversaturated the market. They kept it very simple. Let's do one movie every 3 or 4 years, and it worked. It worked really well, and they kept changing the Bond. So if they did that with superhero movies, they would actually have a chance of making some money, but they won't do that, which is, why they're dying.
I think I heard Martin Scorsese was actually talking about making some Bond movies himself, which, if that's true, that might actually be good, as long as he, keeps the politics out of it.
Yeah. Sorry, who was that?
Martin Scorsese.
Oh, I think he'd be a bit old for Bond. But I mean, we'll see what happens once they announce the new Bond. I'll not prejudge them. I will say, I think, given just how bad a lot of franchises became during the woke era, namely Star Wars, and then we saw recently what they did to Indiana Jones and a lot of the superhero franchises from Marvel, for example, I think Bond walked the tightrope reasonably well. They gave the social justice crowd, the woke mob, like enough to keep them from breaking down the door, but they didn't go overboard with it. Now, that said, I haven't seen the last Bond movie. I still can't bring myself to watch it because I'm a really big Bond fan. And I fear what they did to him in that movie, but I'll have to watch it at some point, I suppose. Anyway, Nilo Matic says, on behalf of all Despot fans, just want to say thanks. Your videos are epics. Well, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the $20. I will be releasing a video on Sunday, which it's just a good old-fashioned fucking piss rip. And, the enemy in that video, they got what they deserved. They needed it, and I hope you'll all enjoy it. I'm editing it at the minute, and I'm enjoying the editing process.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy your videos where you're basically just tearing into stuff are always funny, and it's always fun to see what kind of crazy new memes you come up with with the reflection guy and then Karen iPhone. I'm kind of wondering if you're going to have your own Justice League of meme characters by the end.
I will eventually. Yeah, I'm gonna. That's my plan. I'm gonna have my own cast of characters. Non-playable Sheep's a recent one. He's a good one. So, right, I'm going to read through these plot holes now. Let's take a look. Right, so I had to write these down because there's so many of them, and if I tried to commit them to memory and then speak them, you know, in exposition, it would just it would take forever. So here it is. The premise does not make sense. Why is there a map pointing to the location of Thrawn? Would this map not quickly expire when Thrawn moves location? Why would Thrawn have made this? Why would anyone make this? An enemy would leak the location to the Republic. An ally would not want anyone to know his location. The plot device itself makes no sense. Why would a battle droid have a nuclear explosion self-destruct? Why is it announced prior in the presence of an enemy? And why does it have a timer? Why did Sabine recover 5 minutes after getting stuck with a lightsaber? How did Thrawn get to a different galaxy? Why did Thrawn travel there in the first place? If he's a military genius, he would not. He would have just stayed in the OT galaxy, gathered what forces he could, start a guerrilla campaign, and eventually expand that into a larger, more conventional military campaign. How is Thrawn sustaining a Star Destroyer's worth of personnel on a barren rock with no logistics? How are Star Wheels a thing? Why and how did Ezra get to the new galaxy? This is not explained. Why did Ahsoka have an existential crisis? So Balon Skull defeats her in a fight, and there's this episode where she's basically having a near-death experience, and in this near-death experience, she must choose to live and not want to die. But where the fuck did that come from? She wasn't depressed prior to this. She was having no problems. There was no indications that she was having an existential crisis. It just comes out of nowhere.
And I was just going to
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and she'd already gone through that whole existential crisis thing like twice in the Clone Wars series. So this is just retreading old ground at this point.
Yeah. I mean, also, she's the exact same character after her near-death experience, and her near-death experience did not affect her decision-making in any way and had no impact on any of the characters. What was the point? How is Sabine not familiar with blind defense training? So when Ahsoka gives Sabine the little helmet with the visor and says, right, I want you to train with this. And she says, but I won't see what I'm doing. It's like, weren't you a Jedi apprentice? This is like lesson number 1. How are you not familiar with this training technique? That's just really dumb, bad writing, bad world building. Well, how the fuck is psychometry a thing now? This is a big plot hole. So psychometry is the ability to essentially time travel by walking into an area or touching objects. So Ahsoka walks into the area where Sabine where she was talking to Balon Skull, and she holds the object that Sabine was holding, and she's able to send her mind back in time to listen to a conversation that took place between Sabine and Balon Skull. And that's called psychometry. That ability is called psychometry, and it's so fucking dumb. It just opens up tons of plot holes in the Star Wars universe. Essentially, now we're living in a universe where any Jedi who has the psychometry ability can walk anywhere and just listen to conversations that took place 5 or 10 minutes previously. Right? So now every Jedi is essentially a super spy. That's unbelievably dumb. Like, Dave Filoni just opened up Pandora's box with that. That just breaks. That is what's the fucking purple-haired moron?
That's Admiral Holdo from The Last Jedi.
That is Holdo maneuver bad. Like that is Holdo maneuver level canon breaking. This dumb psychometry thing that Ahsoka has. Filoni thought that it would look cool in the episode, but he doesn't realize what he's done. That was an awful idea. So she's listening to these conversations from the past just by standing there. It's just a bullshit script contrivance to get her to Sabine. But Filoni hasn't even considered the implications of that. Morgan Elsbeth, so that's the main female villain. She has a giant hyperloop in space to go to another galaxy. She absolutely must have this magical bullshit map in order for her hyperloop to work. She's almost fully completes the hyperloop before she even goes to get the map. And when she does go for the map, she sends a few crappy droids after it. So this gigantic hyperloop that she's built is going to be completely useless if she doesn't have the map and she leaves it to the last minute to get the map and she only sends a few droids. And that's just the plot holes that I was able to pick up on the first watch. That is on, and I could get on to shitty world building, but just to stay with the plot holes for a minute, that is fucking woeful writing.
And I feel like also one big thing is that at the end of the day, none of this stuff matters. Nothing that happens in this show matters because we know, because if if the sequels are still canon, we know how everything goes. Nothing that happens in the show matters in the end. The New Republic gets wiped out. The First Order shows up and basically just bulldozes over all the progress that's been made up to this point. We don't see any more Mandalorians. They're probably all gone by now. Ahsoka might be dead. We don't know. And at the end of the day, it ends with Ray Palpatine burying the lightsabers of the original characters and stealing Luke Skywalker's name. And it's like, well, so that's how it ends. Well, I don't care anymore. Bye.
It's nuts.
It's essentially the same problem that happened with Game of Thrones. Like, it was so popular for so long, but once it ended, that basically sucked all the fun out of it, because once you know it ends with that, it's hard to get invested in it again, because you know how it's going to end, and the way it ends sucks. So why be invested?
Exactly. I think they were very smart when they decided to, let's just go 200 years back. Now, of course, they had the source material from George R.R. Martin, but when they made that decision, let's get out of the timeline that we fucked up and just go a couple of centuries back, that was an excellent decision, because no one's going to be invested in the timeline that you destroyed anymore. You've got to get out of there and rebuild the show afresh from a fresh timeline, and that was a really excellent decision that they made. Let's go to the chat here. See what people are thinking about Ahsoka. So Teddy O says the two pilots Hera got killed are never mentioned again during her trial thing. Also, she doesn't seem to be bothered by it at all, and the writer's morals really shine through in the show. Yeah, that's exactly right. So Hera is the green one, just for people who don't know, and she goes basically AWOL, and she brings a bunch of X-wings with her, and two of those X-wings are destroyed, and two of the pilots are killed. And this just isn't mentioned again. It's just treated as like, yeah, whatever. And there's just no action and consequence in this show. That's a really good point, Teddy. There's no action and consequence. It's like, you disobeyed orders and two of our guys got killed. Like, that's court-martial level incompetence. And she gets saved in the trial by a Deus Ex Machina from Leia. There's no sense that actions have consequences in this show.
It really does feel like the writers are basically just taking the first draft of whatever script they threw together, and they don't bother editing it, because the devil is in the details, and it feels like they don't care about the details. They don't care about the inner, like, these little bits and pieces of information that might seem inconsequential, but are important to pay attention to, because otherwise it makes the world feel incomplete or barely held together with duct tape and prayers. It's amateurish, and these are the guys who've literally been striking, demanding more money for this amateur hour storytelling. I have read fan fiction online that is more cohesive and well thought out than this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a lot of fan fiction online is actually really good. I wouldn't disparage fan fiction. It is much better than the shite that Disney Lucasfilm put together. Melvin Deeply says, there's no excuse for Ahsoka being this bad, but still better than Mando Season 3. It's depressing. Not only is Ahsoka better than Mando Season 3, Ahsoka is far better than Mando Season 3, and Ahsoka's shite. That is how bad Mando Season 3 is. I was thinking about this. I was actually going to mention it earlier. I forgot. I'm glad you reminded me, Melvin Deeply. Mando Season 3 is the worst show of the year. I was thinking for a while here, is it as bad as Velma? Velma is a better show than Mandalorian Season 3. I've watched all of Velma. I've watched all of Mandalorian Season 3. They're both absolutely fucking terrible. Velma's a better show because it does have some, like, it sometimes, like, the fundamentals of basic storytelling come through in Velma, like, more closer to the end where no one was watching by that stage, where there's a couple of things happen which are okay. Like, for example, Velma kind of realizes what a dick she was to Black Shaggy. Now, what they do with that, it doesn't, they fuck that up even. But there's like little flashes of what could have been decent little plot lines. And the animation looks fine. There's nothing wrong with the animation. In terms of the direction, the visual direction, Velma looks fine. It's an absolutely terrible show. It's a disgusting show, and it's an evil show. But and it also has a lot of cringe in it, because there's this really ham-fisted political messaging, like super in-your-face, fourth wall breaking, fuck you if you're not an orange-haired feminist, basically. That's quite. It's really cringe and funny, and not funny in the way they intended. It's funny in that they actually thought that was a good idea. You can hate watch it to an extent, but Mando is just unbelievably boring, and it feels every single element of good storytelling and good film. Characterization fails. The acting is fucking terrible. The CGI is shit. Lizzo is there. The action scenes suck. The villain shows up 5 minutes before the end. There's no story. There is no plot. Why is Baby Yoda still here? It is an appalling show. I have to say, I think Mandalorian season 3 is the worst than Boba Fett. It is the worst Star Wars show. I don't think people even realize just how fucking bad it is. It's an astoundingly terrible piece of media.
And the worst part is that the idea behind it could have been so good. A space western about a bounty hunter. That could have been fun. Have him going around collecting bounties, hunting guys down. But no, it starts out with this whole fetch quest to deliver this bait, to find out where to take this baby, then deliver the baby, and then take the baby back. And then in the third season, he basically hands the literal title of the show, The Mandalorian, over to freaking shoot. I know her name.
Bo-Katan.
Bo-Katan, who was a terrorist and basically the one who had a huge hand in causing Mandalore as a whole to be destroyed. And she's the one we're supposed to be rooting for. The lady who literally screwed up twice.
But she's a woman. All right, so let's have a look here. Comrade Fish, any modern day Disney movie has more holes in it than a World War I battlefield. That's exactly right. They're just torn to shreds by plot holes. Let's see, Jedis can do anything now, says Wolf Council. That's a problem. It's called, power creep. We saw power creep become a problem in Marvel, and it also stakes creep. Like the stakes are eventually, it's the whole world is in danger, and then the whole universe, and then it's the whole multiverse, and you've got the same thing with the Force in Star Wars now. It's force creep. The Jedis are simply too powerful. Someone who is really strong with the Force is essentially a superhero now, and that's just never what it was about. It made you very powerful, but it didn't make you a superhero. So yeah, it's become overpowered, and the Force creep is a big problem now. RRTNZ says, I can't explain the psychometry plot hole. They left the Stonehenge on record, and Ahsoka used the Force to play it back. Yeah, that's only slightly less. That's essentially it. Yeah, she said, Sabine has left a memory. What the fuck does that mean? It means that the script needs me to get to Sabine, so I've just got to come up with some magical bullshit device to get there. The psychometry was a disaster. So Comrade Fish says, how the hell did Emperor Palpatine survive being electrocuted and falling down a massive tube? I didn't pay attention to the sequel trilogy. It was never explained. No, wait. They did actually explain this.
Poorly.
Somehow. That's how.
Yeah, but from what I can understand, apparently he made a bunch of clone bodies of himself and somehow transferred his soul to one of those bodies, because apparently that somehow makes a lot more sense. It really does show that they are so creatively bankrupt that they literally looked at a guy falling thousands of feet down a shaft into a core that explodes and thought, yeah, we can bring that guy back, no problem. Rather than just stick with the plan of just making Kylo Ren the main bad guy. Because no, we have to have a weird, we have to bend over backwards and make all the Reylo shippers happy, even though he dies at the end. And Star Wars at this point is borderline unsalvageable, and it's sad. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, but just seeing the amateur hour writing of these last few years, it's sad. It's just pathetic.
Yeah. Nathan Malik says, what are your thoughts on the Amazon Prime adaptation of The Boys by Eric Kripke, given his woke leanings? I just have not watched The Boys yet. I mean, it's on the list. It's something that I have been meaning to watch. But to be perfectly honest, I've never been that big into superhero content. If you look at my channel, I have one Marvel movie, or like one Marvel review, I think. I did Ant-Man 3, and it's a short video by my standards. So I've done a lot on Star Wars and different movies and shows. I did She-Hulk as well, but I mean, She-Hulk barely even counts. It's almost its own thing. It's so fucking bad. But I've never been big into superhero content. I enjoy it. I've never been hugely passionate about it. Like I was really passionate about Star Wars back in the day, for example. And there's other things that I'm really passionate about, but I was never hugely into Marvel or superhero stuff. And now that it's kind of dying, I kind of don't see the point in getting into it at this stage because there's so much homework that I would have to do. It would be such a massive investment of time. But I mean, I've still planned to do a video on the Marvels. I'm thinking about doing a video on Blue Beetle. But as for the boys, I haven't seen it. Have you seen that, Cody?
I have. I thought initially I had never heard of Eric Kripke or the comics at first, but I had looked at it and it felt like it was edgy for the sake of being edgy. Like the writers literally went out of their way to make it as gross, vulgar, and depressing as humanly possible because Eric Kripke apparently he has literally gone on record saying that he hates superheroes and he hates the very concept of superheroes. So
yeah,
the comic itself reads like an edgy 15-year-old teenager's like idea of what comic books should really be like. But as for the show itself, it's not bad. The first season or two are pretty decent, but it's been getting more and more visibly woke as things have gone on. More male characters are made to look like idiots and or just horrible people. And the thing that's really annoying is that they try to hand wave it away by having some like this one scene where they have a bunch of booths that are like stereotypical woke stuff like like feminist food or something, but it's so minor and so pedestrian. It's painfully obvious that they did that just so they could say, "Hey, look, we're neutral. We're making fun of woke stuff too." Yeah, on a surface level, maybe. Whereas everything else is just it's just become more and more bogged down by its politics in the more recent series. And people have actually compared, and I think one of the writers actually said that he's compared Homelander to Trump on more than one occasion. That's how they feel about the whole thing, if that's anything to go by.
Yeah. All right. So let's move up. Following on from Ahsoka, there was one more thing I wanted to get into, which was shitty world building in Ahsoka. And actually, I'll get into that in a bit. Can you just give your thoughts about where you think Star Wars, like where is it at now, and what direction do you think it can go in to get the audience back, if that's even possible, or do you think that's possible?
If I was to use a metaphor, like a Star Wars metaphor for it right now, it's basically the ship, the Radish from The Last Jedi, that being coasting by on fumes with people just shooting at it, waiting for it to run out of gas so they can shoot it, they can blow it up while it tries to, in some vain attempt, to survive. Or it's basically gasping at straws at this point and on its last legs. I honestly, I don't know how on earth it can survive at this point, because The Mandalorian was the main anchor that was keeping it afloat, or the main thing keeping it afloat, because that was the thing that was so popular. But after season 3, they basically just shot that in the back of the head at this point. The only thing that's Star Wars related that's even remotely engaging at this point is the Bad Batch animated show. But I don't know how much longer that's going to last for. And even then, I'm worried that they're just going to botch that up, just like they botched everything else up. And if I was to even attempt to try and save it, I would focus less on live action stuff and more on the animation side, because that was the more successful stuff, and it allows them to that allows for more fun and crazy visuals. The characters are able to fight more interestingly, and it really does help sell the fantastical world. But then again, I think I remember hearing they closed down the animation studio that made the Clone Wars show, so that might not even be an option at this point. So at this point, I'd say Star Wars is pretty much hosed. Okay. Well, I guess he had to walk away from the screen for a second. So it's just me, with about 100 people watching me, waiting for me to do something. Well, this is awkward, and I'm trying to be funny. Oh, great. Well, this is definitely uncomfortable. Oh, good grief. I feel like I'm part of a bad stand-up routine. Okay. Well,
Can you hear me, Cody? Sorry,
yeah,
my
yeah,
internet went down for my internet went out for a bit there.
yeah. I don't worry. I was doing a bad stand-up routine trying to entertain everybody, and I'm pretty sure I tanked.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be interested to see how that went. All right. So yeah, let's get on to. Oh, hold on. One more question I want to answer. Nathan Milk, do you know Japanese video game franchise Persona, especially Persona 5? I'm familiar with it, but I haven't played any of the games. So let's get on to. Yeah, we were talking basically about. I was going to mention world building. So this is the last thing I want to mention about Ahsoka. And this really speaks to how shit a writer Dave Filoni is. I mean, basically, I think he's a capable director. The show Ahsoka looks a lot better than Obi-Wan or Boba Fett or Mando. Like it looks visually much better. In terms of his technically, he's capable of rendering spectacle on screen that looks okay. His actor direction is shit. He doesn't know how to direct actors, but he is able to render something that looks decent on screen. But he's pretty bad writer. Like he's a crap writer. Here's just one example of it. So bad word building. So in the most recent episode, you had these red Tuscans, basically a ripoff of the Tuscan Raiders, and you had these gypsy turtles, and they were basically living next to each other. They're living in the same region. Now, the reality is that you can't have both. You can't have both of those people because that's almost like the Mongols living next to a hippie commune. That's not going to happen. The Mongols are just going to go in and kill everybody.
Admittedly, that would be fun to watch, though.
It would. So they're just going to go in and kill everybody and steal all their stuff. If the little turtle people, the turtle gypsies, are allowed to live there, it's because they're paying tribute. The only way that works is if they're paying tribute, and none of that was dealt with. It's just Dave Filoni wanted to have the red Tuscan Raiders, and he wanted to also have these turtle gypsies in his show on this little planet, and that's it. He didn't think, hold on, would these two peoples, one that is ultra aggressive, and essentially raiders, kind of like the Mongols, and the other that is just this little pacifist hippie commune. He didn't think, can they live with each other? No, he just decided, no, I want them both in, so they're going in. And that doesn't work. That's completely incoherent. Also, the gypsies are technologically advanced, but they're socially primitive. So their level of political development is basically kin group. They're not even at a tribal level of political development. They're like at a kin group level, whereby your association is based on relatives. You hang around in family groups, and that's the pre-tribal level of political organization. That's what, for example, Aboriginals in Australia, where people often talk about Aboriginal tribes. There's no such thing as an Aboriginal tribe. That's not how they function. They function in kin groups. And this little gypsy band is a kin group. And so they're completely politically and socially primitive, but they're technologically advanced enough to own these little pods that they can move around in and that are actually quite advanced in terms of defense. So they're able to build these pods and they're quite advanced, but they don't have any other impressive technology. They never built a city. It just doesn't make any sense. The world building sucks. Like just that one thing makes no sense. It doesn't work. You can't build a world like that. You can't have it both ways. That's two examples of Dave Filoni trying to have it both ways, and you can't do that.
I feel like he works better with animation than he does live action, partially because with live action, you basically can control everything about the characters in question, how they look, how they're positioned, how they sound, everything. Whereas with live action, there's more limitations to it. And we saw with the Clone Wars, which he did help direct, and I'm pretty sure he helped write some of it. He can make good stuff, just not maybe live action. But like I said, for whatever reason, Disney Star Wars seems to be all in on live action instead of animation, even though all their endeavors with live action have sucked.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the live action stuff that they've done recently is shite. Hold on, Mo says, will Mr. Reflection present an award at the next year's Woke Awards? I don't think Mr. Reflection is capable about talking about anything except himself. He's only capable of making reference to himself as a reflection of, when he sees a reflection of himself reflected back at himself, he can make reference to that. But I don't think he has a concept of the world outside of that. So I don't think he would quite understand the concept of presenting an award because it has nothing to do with his own reflection.
It still would be kind of funny. It'd be like, and now I would like to present this platinum mirror as a reflection of myself because you can see myself in it and only myself. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's have a look at. So we're talking about where Disney Star Wars is now, and the reason I talked about world building is because if you have, let's take Andor for example. Andor's world building works really well because actions have consequences. It's internally coherent. It's logical. Now, to be honest, I didn't like Andor for a long time. I actually watched the first 4 episodes and thought, oh man, this is really slow and boring. And that is a problem with Andor. The biggest problem with it is that it's badly paced in the first 4 or 5 episodes. It's too slow. They should have cut out about an episode of stuff and picked up the pace a little bit, not too much. You don't need to go crazy, but just pick it up a little bit. And I think more people would have stayed invested and gotten to the point of the show where you really want to keep watching, because you do get to a point in Andor where it does become much more enjoyable and you want to keep watching, but it does take a while to get into the show. The show it's a little bit too slow at the start, but the world building in Andor is excellent because everything makes sense, everything fits well together, and actions have consequences. It's logically coherent, and the writers have put a great deal of thought into every detail, thinking, does this make sense? Or if we're going to have this thing, what else do we need in order for that to work? Whereas in something like Ahsoka, Dave Filoni thinks, I want to have Thrawn on a Star Destroyer in a faraway galaxy with a big army. There you go. Just drops them in there. No logistics, no need to explain who's feeding these people or what is continuing to motivate them in this faraway galaxy, or why they went there. What? No, it doesn't matter. I want that, and the Star Wheels are going to bring Ahsoka there, and that's it. Plops them in. And same thing with all. That's his approach to world building. His approach to world building is essentially almost like it's like a video game, a video game development game. You know those games you can play where you can just kind of build your own world. It's almost like a world building video game where you click on a thing you want and you put it over here, and you click on another thing you want and you put it over here. And it doesn't need to make sense together because it's just a little video game world that you're building for yourself. That's kind of like his approach to world building. If he wants something, he just drops it in and that's it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the equivalent of a kid with a toy box full of all kinds of different animal action figures and just pulling as many out and then just having them act out scenarios, whether or not it makes sense. Having a robot fight against a caveman or a dinosaur or a dragon. It doesn't have to make sense. It just looks cool. And that's the problem. I feel like a lot of his recent attempts have all been about the rule of cool. As long as it looks cool, it doesn't have to make sense. Space whales in Star Wars. Does it make sense? No. French. Does it make sense? No. Does it look cool? That's
not really. Like some of that CGI was horrendous.
Yeah, I really kind of I'm kind of wondering if maybe they should just go like 1,000 years into the past and go to the old Republic. Maybe that would do something. I don't know. They'd probably just screw that up too. But they really put a lot more emphasis on spectacle rather than on substance, which I guess is kind of appropriate considering the fact that they make theme parks and everything. But even that's apparently not been that great these days. So
in terms of a solution, I mean, obviously there is no solution as long as Kathleen Kennedy's there. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think there's a solution as long as Disney is a Star Wars product. But it's clear that Disney are going to continue to pour money down what has become the money pit of Star Wars. It's just a big money sink now. They lose all the money they put into it. A Star Wars product hasn't made money in a long time. I think the last one that made money was Rise of, might have been Mando season 1. That did bring a lot of people into Disney Plus. A lot of people did subscribe for that, but that's why I'd say maybe that made some money. But and also the Baby Yoda toys sold very well, so that definitely made money. But since then, every product they've done has been a financial flop. But that said, they're not going to change. They're going to keep making Star Wars content at a pretty fast rate. And what they really, if they can somehow get rid of Kathleen Kennedy, which they can't, but at this stage, I think the only solution, what Star Wars would really need, is to just get out of the current timeline. I was watching a video the other day. I can't remember who it was, but it was a well-known writer, and he was saying that he had written a script for Star Wars. It was like a Jedi origin script, and it took you 25,000 years into the past from A New Hope, 25,000 years before. And it was the origins of the Jedi. And he had written this story, and Kathleen Kennedy just completely discarded it. And I was thinking, like, that's really what Star Wars needs to do. They need to do the same thing that Game of Thrones did. Get out of the current timeline because it's been so fucked up and people are so disinterested in it and they're so checked out of it, and build something new. Just use the same universe, but take it way back in time to just something completely different. And or you could go forward in time maybe, but ideally you want to go back in time and flesh the history of the universe out a bit. That I think could help. The same way that it helped Game of Thrones, just getting out of the current timeline and rebooting it from that perspective. But apart from that, go ahead.
Well, I agree that could work, but the problem is that the Game of Thrones, the guys in Game of Thrones, by that point they'd already booted the main showrunners D&D from it, who were partially responsible for the original Game of Thrones season collapsing, and the writers were smart, who they brought on were smart enough to know that they needed to make the story entertaining and good if they wanted to get their audience back, which they had lost. But the problem is that Disney has proven on a consistent basis that even if they did decide to shift gears and set more Star Wars stuff thousands of years in the past, that's not a guarantee that the writers that they bring on are going to be any better than the ones that we've been stuck with before, especially with Kathleen Kennedy constantly sticking her fingers into literally everything Star Wars related.
Yeah, even Andor, like even Andor does have her fingerprints on it. Like, you've got these female characters that are a little bit too strong, a little bit too organized, a little bit too bossy. And of course, we've got to have our lesbian relationship. And that's not an incidental lesbian relationship. That is there to meet the diversity requirements of Lucasfilm.
And that's the problem. As long as Kathleen Kennedy is there, she will find some way, somehow, to crowbar her beliefs, her feminism, her forces female nonsense into everything Star Wars, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. And at this point, I don't know what there's left to do, because unless she gets canned or booted at some point, this is just going to this is going to happen. Even if you get a blank slate, she's literally just going to smear her garbage all over that new slate.
Yeah. Nathan Malik says, have you ever read or seen Kentaro Miura's Berserk? I've seen the anime adaptations and analysis videos of the original manga. No, I watch almost no anime, so I haven't seen it. I mean, at the minute, Star Wars you've got the Mandoverse is gone, basically, after Mandalorian Season 3. I saw on Doomcock's channel, I don't know how reliable his sources are, but he said that that show had a 97% drop-off. That's what he heard from what he calls his spies in Hollywood, that Mando Season 3 had a 97% drop-off from the opening episode, from the episode 1 until the end of the season. And that doesn't surprise me that much. I mean, I don't know if it was as high as 97% like he was claiming, but it was certainly a huge figure because it was such an unbelievably boring show and it was absolutely terrible. So I could definitely see that. So the Mandoverse is gone. People are just that Season 3 wiped it out. Any interest that there was in that show, and there was some, it was absolutely destroyed by Mandalorian Season 3. So that's gone. Boba Fett was a disaster and Obi-Wan was a disaster. So these origin TV shows that they're doing are not origin TV shows, but these character TV shows, they suck and no one's interested in watching them anymore. So that didn't work. Now they're bringing Ahsoka, and Ahsoka it's been better received than those 3 shows, but it's still pretty crap. And I think after the season finale, the enthusiasm for it's going to cool off very quickly, and people are going to realize that actually it's just a big pile of shit. And maybe not as bad as, say, Mando Season 3 or Obi-Wan, but still pretty bad. And this leaves you with, basically, the only critical success they've had is Andor. It flopped, so I don't think they're that interested in pursuing it. And they want to do the Rey Palpatine movie. So, I mean, going forward, everything they've tried has failed. Moving forward, I don't see... Like the direction, they're trying to go in so many different directions at once. Like they want to be serious with Andor, and they want to be more grounded and adult, and really focus on world building and logical coherence. So that's your Andor, and then you want to really flesh out the characters and just milk the characters for everything that they're worth by creating these TV shows for them. That didn't work, and now with Ahsoka, let's just adapt the animated stuff that was popular, and we'll see if that works. But I mean, apparently it hasn't worked, and no one's watching Ahsoka because it's shit. So everything they're trying hasn't failed. Like, what are they going to do next?
There's not much left they can do. They've basically run through every single character that anyone cared about. I mean, they ruined Lando, Luke, Han, Leia, Chewbacca, I guess, kind of, Ahsoka, Anakin, Obi-Wan. They've ruined pretty much everything. That's the problem. They have literally broken or exploited every single thing they could, and there's nothing left. There is literally nothing left. This timeline is beyond repair. There is nothing they can do. Although on the positive side, they can't make it any worse.
That's true. I mean, they, like you said, they've run through every character, they've destroyed everything, and they've completely chased off the fan base. So going forward, there's literally nothing they can do. I really think that the only hope there is for Star Wars is if somebody else gets the IP. If, for example, Apple bought it, and I'm not saying Apple isn't woke, they certainly are, as you'll see in my next video. But I think they're competent enough when it comes to their studio division to largely, it certainly wouldn't be. I mean, God, would they make the same mistakes? I don't know.
Would.
Look, I'm just going to be honest. I don't think Star Wars can survive the current cultural environment in the United States. I just don't. I don't think it can survive the political activism. I don't think it can survive the determination of these political activists that are coming into studios that are determined to use every single show as a platform to push their message because they believe that to do otherwise is immoral. There was, during the 2020 George Floyd riots, they even had a slogan for it. They said silence is violence. And what they meant by that is that if you're not actively trying to tear down the system and to rebuild it in the image of the woke, then you are doing something wrong. If you're not an activist, then you are immoral. And it's just kind of a Soviet approach to art. The Soviets, when they thought about art, their attitude was, if this art isn't being used as a political tool, if it's not being used to push the political messages of the proletariat and the people and all this nonsense, then it is decadent, it is bourgeois, and it's degenerate. That was their belief. And these woke idiots, they very much believe the same thing. Art that does not push a message, art that does not take advantage of its platform to make the world a better place is they wouldn't use the word degenerate because they are degenerates. They believe that degeneracy is a good thing. But the word they would use is, God, I don't know, problematic, or they wouldn't say immoral because, again, they don't believe in morality, but they would basically, they think that it's a bad thing. They think that is profoundly wrong. You have this platform to let the world know what a horrible racist country America is, and you didn't take advantage of that. That was wrong. They have a Sovietized approach to art, and they don't even think of it as an approach. They don't think of this as a paradigm that they're operating within. They simply just believe that that's what art is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's basically the equivalent of, they went from looking at art as an expression of different viewpoints and thoughts and opinions, like what you see in an art gallery, and now they just view art as the equivalent of the stuff you see on propaganda posters from like World War II or like the Cold War in Soviet Russia during all those periods. Because now if it's not pushing an ideology, or if it's not hammering you over the head with their political beliefs, then it's not art, then it's not useful. Which I was hoping that by now people would have gotten sick of this nonsense and we would have finally gotten over it already, but it's still going. And I'm just wondering, is there any end in sight for this? Or do we have to basically say, we've had enough of this garbage. We're not racist, sexist, or anything else. You guys just make trash content. So please stop.
I mean, it's going to be, if there's not going to be any sort of recovery, it'll be more like balkanization. So Disney will never, from now till cometh the rapture, Disney will never stop this. They are going to continue with turning out political content. They might try to be more subtle about it. They might try to insert the messages more subliminally or at a more subtextual level, or to just push it to the side a little bit. But they're fundamentally, that is not going to change at Disney ever. I think Netflix, I think Netflix can recover, and they're still going to make shit. I mean, for every One Piece Netflix make, you get a Cleopatra, right? And any documentary that they make is going to be infused with modern political imperatives. So I was watching a Netflix documentary recently, and it was supposed to be a crime murder show, and instead I had some middle-aged white woke moron, some woman on there talking about how the word prostitute is bad and no one should use it. Instead, we should all be saying sex worker. Like, this is supposed to be about a serial killer who was murdering prostitutes in the 70s, and I have to stop and listen to a 5-minute lecture by some fucking Karen about how we shouldn't use the word prostitute, we should say sex worker. Like, this is fucking Netflix. And so, yes, they are capable of making stuff like One Piece, but for every One Piece, you do get several pieces of absolute garbage, like Cleopatra. And that will continue with Netflix. But at the same time, Netflix are happy to let a creator, a director, a writer, whatever, go down their own path and make their own thing. If it's not political. Disney aren't. If One Piece was being made at Disney, there's no way it would have come out looking like that. No way.
Well, actually, Oda himself, he had a lot of pull with Netflix. He basically put his foot down and told them that I will not sign unless I sign off on everything. I am not going to let you make this show. The guy had creative control, and he exerted it as much as humanly possible. Even though there were some changes that they made that he wasn't that happy about, Oda still stuck to his guns because he is dedicated. Because that's the thing about Japanese artists, they are very passionate about what they do and their art, and while some weren't as aggressive with maintaining their content, Oda really did. But that's part of the problem. One Piece is so gargantuanly long that I honestly question whether or not they'll even be able to keep this Netflix series going for as long as possible, because of how much stuff they have to fit in. Because like I said, the East Blue Saga is the most normal of the sagas. The fights get crazier. The islands get more elaborate and crazy. Everything gets more and more nutty as time goes on. And I, honest to God, don't think Netflix has the budget or the time to make 10 or 11 seasons of that. And I don't think Oda even has the time to oversee it for all that time. So I'm pretty sure it won't last that long.
Yeah, I would say you're probably right about that. I think I'll wrap that up with you, Fam Without a Face. So thank you very much for coming on and taking the time to watch all this shit and prepare for the stream. I really appreciate it.
No, it's no problem, and I'm just hoping I did good for you and all your viewers, even if I couldn't come up with any funny jokes to tell during the brief interlude when it was just me hanging out to dry here.
All right, man. But thanks very much, and have a great day. All right.
No problem. You too as well, and I hope to be back again, maybe with some of the other guys you do these streams with in the future.
Yeah, hopefully. All right, thank you. So I'm going to run through the chat now. So if you want to start chatting, I'll be here for another wee while, so you can put your thoughts in the chat, and I will endeavor to respond to them. So I'll go through here and see if there's anything I didn't respond to. So Nathan Milk says, Despot, concerning the cultural iconoclasm, Confederates, of course, were soft targets for very specific reasons, but it would never stop with them or America. Even Abraham Lincoln was targeted. Yeah, there was a mob during the BLM riots in 2020 who wanted to destroy the Lincoln Monument, and Trump had to use the American military to defend it. This actually reminded me of an incident which occurred during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The only reason Forbidden City wasn't destroyed because during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the Red Guards were destroying everything. Like, they were destroying graveyards because the gravestones were old. They had old Chinese symbols. They had allusions to old religion, and this all had to be destroyed. And a large crowd of them gathered near the Forbidden City, and they were determined to go and destroy the Forbidden City because it was old, right? And Mao had ordered that old culture be destroyed, and they were young revolutionaries, and they would have torn Forbidden City down. And the only reason it wasn't torn down was because the prime minister, bear in mind, Mao wasn't the prime minister at the time. In fact, he didn't have much political power at all, which is one of the reasons he launched the Cultural Revolution. The prime minister of China had to use the army to prevent this crowd of Red Guards from destroying the Forbidden Palace. And it was the same thing. History repeats itself. Trump had to bring out the American military to stop them destroying the Lincoln Monument, and they absolutely would have destroyed the Lincoln Monument if they had been allowed. And you see, when they started with the Confederate statues, which they shouldn't have done, because tearing down a statue is predicated upon the idea that a statue is fundamentally a proposition that this was a good person, and that's not necessarily true. A statue, usually that's what they are, but that's not how we should think of them. We should think of a statue as a historical monument. Like, this is part of the history of this area. So if you, for example, go to, say, North Carolina, and there are statues to the fire eaters, the people who wanted to secede from the Union first, and there would have been statues of Confederates. I'm sure there still are in North Carolina if there's any left. They should be left up, not because you agree with the Confederates, not because you agree with a state which was quite literally founded on slavery. I know they say that a lot about the states. That's not true. But the Confederacy, you could argue, was founded on slavery, which I would argue that. So there's going to be statues of these people, people who today we think of as terrible people. But those statues should remain because it is an important part of the history of that area. It makes it a more culture. It makes the area culturally richer. And to destroy the statues also is to attempt to hide that past. You shouldn't hide from your past. It's important that you understand your past, and that the people understand the past of the places that they live in, so that they can reflect on that history and they can appreciate how far that we as a society have come. When you destroy statues and things like that, you encourage cultural myopia. You encourage people to live in the eternal present. It's utterly stupid. And what begins with the destruction of Confederate statues will never end until every single American flag has been burned and replaced with a LGBT flag. Because that's where that will end. The people that are tearing down these statues, you think they're going to be satisfied once all the Confederate monuments are gone? No, they won't be satisfied until they have their boot on the throat of every single person they disagree with. So, yeah, I enjoyed that wee political rant. Right. Did you watch the live action Death Note? No, I haven't seen Death Note. RTNZ, that will happen. They're that clueless. Yeah, that's happening in a lot of the West. Like, even in Canada, they removed statues of one of Canada's prime ministers because Aboriginal or Native children were being educated in Canadian schools at the time. And this was the argument that they make now is this was cultural genocide. It's like, hold on. These people will simultaneously complain that natives in Canada are making less money than, say, white people or Asian Canadians, right? They'll complain about that and they'll say this is evidence of racial discrimination. But at the same time, they're also complaining that these people were given an education that would allow them to compete socioeconomically with those groups. Like, pick one. Do you want them? Do you believe that the education of Native children is inherently bad and that shouldn't happen? That they should just be left alone to their own culture, which in the 1950s would have been essentially illiterate? Do you think that they should have been left in illiterate ignorance? In which case, if that had happened, your complaint now would be that they were given no education, that they were excluded from education. So no matter what it is, whether the government's trying to educate Native people or whether they're trying to just have them not educated so that they can maintain their own culture, in one case, you're going to criticize them for cultural genocide. In the other case, you're going to criticize them for essentially segregation and enforced ignorance. Like, these bastards, you can't please them. No matter what you do, they'll always have some label to throw at you. All right. This is the Chinese Cultural Revolution of the West. Well, it's certainly what we've been living through since roughly 2016 has been a cultural revolution. That's absolutely true. Any thoughts on Renee Zellweger and Snow White debacle? Yeah, I mean, I have my thoughts on it. Renee Zellweger wasn't properly media trained. So I think Disney just, they gave her the talking points. When she goes on there and she says things like, oh, it's going to be about Snow White coming into her own power and she's going to be fearless and strong and brave and true, and the prince isn't going to be stalking her. She was repeating talking points that Disney had given her to say. And she also, it helps that she believes this stuff from Disney's perspective. But Disney, obviously, they were sloppy when it came to media training. And media training should involve literally you put someone in front of a dummy mic and you ask them questions as if you're a reporter. That's part of media training. And that wasn't done properly with her because she's such a fucking insufferable personality. Or maybe Disney just looked at her and thought, oh, wow, she's wonderful. People are going to love her. And then they set her loose upon the world and that happened. So, and that's not to take anything away from Rachel Zegler. She's a wee bitch. There's a tweet that she sent out. It's just her giving the finger to the camera. And it says something like, respect women. And then she called a guy a Nazi because he voted for Trump. Just the usual stuff. She's a nasty wee bit of work. And probably the worst thing I thought she said was something like, I can't remember who she was talking about. She was talking about her co-star. Let's just call him John. She said, "Oh, John, he plays the prince. They might cut his parts out of the movie. They might not. Whatever. It's Hollywood, baby." She said that, and essentially what she was saying was, this massive role that this guy has been able to get for himself that might help him break out and make a bit of a career for himself. I don't give a fuck if it gets cut because fuck him. That's what she was saying. That's the worst thing that for me that she said, because she got that big break. She got a big break when Steven Spielberg hired her to play in West Side Story. So she got her break, but she's perfectly happy to just laugh about some guy not getting his break. Just selfish, horrible, weak cunt. All right. So, and she deserves every bit of criticism that she's gotten. She's horrible, wee human being. And then she'd have the cheek then to go online and say things like, "Oh, I hope the world just becomes nicer." She's just such a typical spoiled brat that is the product of modern entitled feminism and the absolute garbage that passes for an education system in the United States. I mean, yeah, so that's what I think of her. Basically, the same thing everyone else thinks of her, only I suppose I'm a bit more blunt about it. All right. How long do you reckon it'll be before Russia starts lobbing nukes, says Joseph Dunn? I doubt that that's going to come down to that. I'll not. I am certainly not any sort of authority on the Russia-Ukraine war or anything like that, or the geopolitical situation. I like to think very deeply about things and to study them before I expound on them, and that's just not something that I would know enough about. It's a very messy situation. I mean, my attitude is just get a ceasefire going as soon as possible so that they can stop blowing each other up. That's my ideal scenario. So Nuclear Bomb says, Despot, if a writer wanted to get a novel adopted but didn't want it to get filled with that woke nonsense, how long do you think that person should wait? I think that person should seek to adopt that novel at an independent level. You cannot go to Hollywood. So, and it's not just the woke nonsense. If you have a novel that you want to adopt and you take it to Hollywood, they will never adopt the novel faithfully. They will adopt the bits and pieces of it that they like, and then the adaptation will be tinkered with and filled with by studios and script supervisors and script doctors and people that they bring in. Ultimately, the writer is never gonna be happy with the product because it's Hollywood. It's a commercialist corporate system. If the writer wanted the novel to be adopted faithfully, the best thing to do would be to try to give it to an independent filmmaker to make it on a budget. Barring that, if that's not a possibility, it would be to hire an animation company to animate it for you at a very basic level, like almost a YouTube animation. Or if you could do it yourself, like just use a bunch of stock footage and maybe video game footage and try to make your own novel. And that wouldn't be the finished product, but it would almost be like a treatment, a movie treatment. Like, this is what I envisage. And if you're not able to get the movie, at least you've got that little treatment that you put together with video game footage and stock footage and things like that. I mean, I did that with my Velma movie, and it is a movie. It's a movie that I created on my channel. I Can Fix Velma. It's a little start to finish movie which I just made and animated myself. I reused lots of footage from Velma and photoshopped a lot of it and put in a lot of video game footage for the final battle, and used footage from other movies and just made this little movie myself. You can do stuff like that. You don't need to go through the film process even. And hopefully in the future, as things like Unreal Engine 5 come in and people are able to render this more and more realistically and at cheaper cost, we will be able to start producing our own movies. Maybe we won't be able to have the big spectacle that they can have in Hollywood, but we'll be able to fairly cheaply render a novel into a really decent adaptation, I think. Hopefully that technology is coming. So totally agree with Despot. Happy RRTNZ. Happy to admit the evils of colonization, just as long as we stop pretending that native people were noble savages. Yeah, they weren't noble savages. Like, there's many stories I could tell you about the absolutely horrifying immorality of most native peoples. People tend to think of morality as something that just is. People who have no education, they don't understand that morality, like anything else, it has changed massively over time. And if you go back long enough, like here's an example. I was listening to Christopher Hitchens' video yesterday. He talked about a Somalian girl. She was 13 years old, and she left her house on her own for the first time because of like some sort of war situation. And a group of men saw that she was on her own, and they decided it would be a good idea to do things to her that I can't talk about on YouTube for fear of getting a strike. And she then went to a religious court to try to get, some justice and to try to get these men punished for their crime. And instead, she was stoned to death because she had had sex, but she wasn't married. That was the position of the court. And that, if you go back in time, you'll find that kind of morality and much, much worse. I was reading about the Mongols recently. The Mongols would just slaughter entire cities full of people as a warning to other cities not to rebel. So the idea that, native people are noble savages and that they were hard done by the West, the best thing that could possibly have happened, for example, to the Aboriginals of Australia is to be colonized by the British, because if the Russians had colonized them, it would have wiped them out. If the Japanese had colonized them, they would have wiped them out. If the Indonesians had done it, they would have wiped them out. All right, they should be very grateful that it was the British that colonized Australia and not anybody else, because anybody under any other regime, even other European countries, they would have got a far worse deal. And some countries would have just, like I said, if Japan had got Australia, Japanese just would have exterminated them. And the Japanese wouldn't have thought twice about it. And they did that with the Ainu of Hokkaido. They basically exterminated them. So, yeah, but instead of considering themselves lucky, they just think the British are colonized, or, they came and colonized us. Yeah, they did colonize you, and you're lucky they colonized you, because colonization is a good thing. If you weren't colonized, you would still be living as your ancestors lived, in an absolutely miserable, horrible existence. If you don't believe me, go read about it. It was awful. There was nothing noble about it. It was very savage, but there was nothing noble about it. All right. God, it's gotten really political, hasn't it? Enalb says, be man, Iran or China. I don't really understand that comment. Hi, Despot, Darkbox. I found this propaganda film from 1915, Birth of a Nation. I'm familiar with that, with Birth of a Nation. I wouldn't do Birth of a Nation for several reasons. For a start, if you were to use images of the KKK in your YouTube videos, you would definitely get demonetized, and there's a pretty good chance you would get a strike, I think, as well, if you were to use the real footage. Also, that the Birth of a Nation has been very, very heavily analyzed already. Like, there's a lot of videos online to talk about its impact. And in any case, when I analyze propaganda, I focus on modern corporate propaganda. That's generally what I focus on, as opposed to, say, political propaganda, because when people see political propaganda, they know that that's what they're looking at. But when they look at corporate propaganda, they don't necessarily know that it's propaganda, which is one of the reasons I enjoy analyzing it. All right. Nathan Milk says, Despot, let's not forget about Edward Colston and others in 2020 in Britain. I don't have to agree with them, but tearing these statues down means other figures opposed to them are targeted as well. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Statues just shouldn't be torn down, full stop. And no matter what the person who in the past did, they're an important part of history, and they make the place that they're in just more interesting to be in. All right. So Enalb says, as soon as England left India with its independence, they murdered each other by the hundred. That's true. As soon as Britain was winding down in India, the Indians basically they filled the power gap with a civil war, and millions of people. We don't know to this day how many people died in the civil war in India, which it was essentially what would eventually become the Pakistanis and the Indians having their first war, and millions of people died. It was Muslims and other religious groups just getting laid into each other. Horrible carnage. And the British, they did what they could where they were able to control the violence. But the reality is that they just couldn't, because India was so vast and the British just didn't have the numbers. In fact, my biggest criticism of the British with regard to the rule of India is that they left too fast. They left very, very quickly, and they left in a hurry, rather than a more slow-paced, phased withdrawal over time, replacing British troops with Indian troops, replacing the politicians with Indian politicians. It was just, they left very quickly, and they kind of left the Indians in the lurch. Same thing happened in Africa. So the biggest criticism of the British Empire that I have is that they left their colonies far too quickly without assuring that the civil and military infrastructure was there on the ground to keep the peace after they left. Jay the Gent says, you watched Bros. Here's a little something for your sacrifice. $5. Thank you very much, Jay the Gent. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you acknowledge my suffering, because to watch Bros is to suffer. That is easily one of the worst things that I have had to watch for my channel. Just an awful movie, and the the lead guy in it, the main guy whose name I don't even want to say again, is just a disgusting screen presence. He's just horrible to watch. He's bloody awful. Apparently, he was in this thing called Parks and Recs or something, and he absolutely ruined the show. People just hated seeing him on there. Whatever screen presence and charisma is, he has the opposite, and he has it in spades. Jesus Christ, I hope I never see his face again in anything. Although I don't think I will. I think that the Bros completely destroyed his career. RRTNZ says the country I live in has a huge left wing movement that would have us believe that colonization was the worst thing ever and was happy times here prior. They also hush up the cannibalism. That's true. I mean, there's plenty wrong with the, what do you call those guys in New Zealand? I forget what they're called, the native people there, but they're the ones that are covered in tattoos. The Maori. Yeah, there's plenty that the Maori did wrong. So for a start, the Maori absolutely destroyed the ecology of New Zealand. They burned down millions of acres of forests, and they wiped out a lot of species of flightless birds. They were massively environmentally destructive. And shortly after the British arrived, the Maori started buying weapons from them. They started buying muskets from them. And now this was a primitive people, but they had a modern technology, and they were using these muskets to kill each other. So different competing kin groups, not tribes, mind. I know that the activists like to refer to them as tribes. They weren't tribes, they were kin groups. There is a difference. These different kin groups that were enemies just started wiping each other out. And there were all these, it wasn't like a two-side civil war. The Maori were all these different little groups all shooting each other. And they were actually kind of tanking their own population numbers. These musket wars got so bad, the British had to intervene to stop them. So the Maori did a great job of destroying New Zealand and destroying themselves without the British lifting a finger. In fact, the British stopped them from wiping themselves out with their musket wars. And again, if the Japanese had gotten New Zealand, which they may well have if no one else had taken it, they just would have exterminated the Maori, plain and simple. Blue Black Op. I always thought it was hilarious. Some of the countries that complained about the British taking artifacts and preserving them. Yeah, I mean, these were just things that were lying in the ground. If anyone had found it in that native country, it just would have ended up in a bazaar, sold off to some rich guy, and then destroyed in a riot or something like that, or when his house was burned down by some angry mob. The British saved all of those priceless artifacts because no one in that part of the world had even the slightest interest in preserving them. The like Egyptology did not exist until the French invaded Egypt and conquered it very briefly. And then that was taken over by the British because the Egyptians weren't doing it. The Mamelukes weren't doing it. So to criticize the British for saving these priceless artifacts is absolutely absurd. And just because something from thousands of years ago is in the land that your people now inhabit does not mean that that belongs to your people. This was created by a completely different ethnic group. Just because it happens to be on the land you currently are standing on doesn't make it yours. All right. So are you going to see the creator? I haven't heard of the creator. I might look into that. Texas Tree Frog. What are your thoughts on Star Wars: The Clone Wars? I believe it was the last genuinely good Star Wars content before everything went into a downward spiral. I never watched the Clone Wars. I was never big into animated Star Wars, so I can't comment on it, but I have heard it was very good. Nathan Milk, I know the pro-removal crowd users Germany disowning the Nazis is why they should get rid of certain statues, despite differences like Washington Post and Michelle Harris. Well, I mean, these are the kind of people that the Nazis is the only history they know. So they compare everything to the Nazis because they don't know anything else. And in any case, the removal of statues in Germany, a lot of it was a part of the process of denazification. So they didn't want to leave them up, and they couldn't really leave them up because it was just politically impossible at the time. And in any case, to suggest that the American founding fathers have anything in common with the Nazis is just dumb. And the people who say it know it's dumb. They just don't have anything else to compare them against because they don't know any other history except the Nazis were bad. That is the extent of their historical knowledge. Nazis bad. That's about it. It can be summed up in 2 words. All right. Blue Black Up gave me $2. Thank you very much. Prayers for that YouTube elder having to watch Bros. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. The Maori also killed off the Moriori people, and they ate them alive. I don't know about that aspect of their history, but it sounds interesting. I might have to look that up. I'll see if I can find some YouTube videos about what the Maori did to the Moriori. All right, Darkbox. Hi, Despot. I see a few videos that talk about this show called The Owl House, and from the review, they're all positive, and I could agree why this show is good. Do you know what I'll do? I'll make a note. Owl House. I might check that out. What's an animated show? I'll have a look at it anyway. See. Maybe I'll watch an episode and see how it turns out. Um, okay, they used LGBTQ representation right and have good characters and good stories. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this. Like, what is the best way to have gay characters and lesbians and all the rest of them in shows if you want that? And honestly, I think they should just make a show that is dedicated to that. If you want to do a show with lots of gay characters, just make a gay show. I think they did that with Will and Grace, just something like that, where half the characters are gay or something, or a third are gay, and you can do that, but just advertise it as that thing. Advertise it as an explicitly gay show, but don't suddenly turn around and say, "Oh yeah, Lando Calrissian's pansexual now, so he likes to fuck robots," or Luke Skywalker's gay now. I think they made that statement recently. Like, stop trying to insert your sexual identitarianism into modern franchises. Just go and make your own thing. But obviously, that's not what they're about. They're cultural imperialists. They want to conquer. They want to conquer other culture, and if they can't conquer it, they want to destroy it. Ahsoka is great. You're just mean, says Grimmer Drunk 3PO. Well, maybe I'm not going to deny that I'm mean, but unfortunately, Ahsoka is not great. RRTNZ, the Moriori thing is a bit exaggerated. Maori did kill and eat a bunch of them, but there are still Moriori alive now. Well, there you go. Which I guess that's nice that they weren't all completely exterminated. Despot, what do you think of Abraham Lincoln and the Confederates? Jesus, man, how long do you have? I mean, I've read many books about the Civil War. I would like to read more about antebellum period. I've read some books about the antebellum period. What do I think of the Confederates? I think Abraham Lincoln was the greatest president that the United States has had. And I think that the Confederates were rebels that needed to be crushed, plain and simple. And I think that the idea of setting up a state to preserve the institution of slavery, which at the time was already on the way out. I mean, France had gotten rid of it. The UK, Britain had gotten rid of it. I think there were Portugal, maybe. I'm not sure. There were a couple of other European countries that had gotten rid of it. And it was illegal in most states. And the Confederates built a nation in order to preserve it. Just unbelievably stupid. And I also think the Confederates, the secession was a massive overreaction. You already had a great deal of power. I mean, there was even they called it the Southern Slave Power Conspiracy. The North really despised how much political power the South had because they were able to count their slaves as 2/3 of a person, which meant that they got more political representation in Congress. Incidentally, that's why the 2/3 clause is in there, to minimize the influence of the slave states politically. It was actually an anti-slavery measure. Yeah, I mean, I think the Confederacy needed to be crushed, plain and simple. All right, so the left say stuff like Nazis and bigots so much that it means nothing now. Well, I mean, of course, it's been overused. So anytime you accuse someone of being a Nazi, what you're essentially saying is, I dislike you, I disagree with you, I don't really have the ability, I'm not articulate enough to describe why what you're saying is wrong, but you're a Nazi because that's the only history I know. That's essentially what you're saying. Enal, Despot definitely has the best critique of woke cancer on YouTube by far. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I mean, there is a lot of good stuff out there that's pushing back against the establishment rot that we get. I mean, Mahler's a personal favorite of mine. He did an absolutely brilliant Star Wars video recently talking about Ahsoka. Despot, what do you... Oh, yeah. Okay, so... Hi, Despot. I wonder if you could make some good review with good and great movies. Well, I'll be... says Darkbox. I'll be honest. I'll be honest with you. If I make a very positive review and say, this is a great movie, it's going to get far fewer views. That's just the reality. If you go onto Critical Drinker's channel, for example, and you look at all of his positive reviews, they have far fewer views than the negative ones. People do want the negative stuff, but I do balance it when I talk about negative movies or shit movies and TV shows. I contrast them with the really good stuff. So, for example, when I was talking about Solo, I contrasted the world building in Solo and how Solo fails on details. I contrasted that with Andor and I praised Andor for that. And I also contrasted the depiction of Lando Calrissian in Solo with the depiction of him in Empire and Return of the King, which is really good. He's depicted really well in those movies, and he's a great character. And he's awful in Solo. So I'm talking about good stuff, but I'm usually doing it in contrast to the bad stuff. There is one. I think I'll make a positive, just a sheer outright positive video for Halloween. There's a I want to do the Simpsons Halloween Special 5, which is just an absolute masterpiece. It's maybe the greatest Simpsons episode made, certainly the greatest Halloween special episode that they made. So I would like to do an episode just talking about, I'd like to do a video just talking about how great Treehouse of Horror 5 is, because it is brilliant. I love that episode. The Simpsons in its heyday was genius. I'd love to do some really positive stuff talking about The Simpsons. I will do them in future. I will do some positive videos, and I'm also going to be starting a new series. Because I've got a few series. I've got my propaganda analysis series. I've got I Can Fix. I have I'm drawing a blank. I've got another one, but Anatomy of a Disaster. I've done Bros and I've done Woman King, and I want to keep working on those series. But I do want to add one more, which is basically, was it really that bad? I think I'm going to call the series, and I'll be looking at old shows. I've been meaning to do it for a while. I just haven't had a chance. But I'd like to do a bit of that, and we're talking about shows and really looking at the positive aspects of old shows, old movies from like the 90s that we thought at the time were shit, but might actually be maybe better than we remember. So I will be doing a bit more, in future. I'll definitely be doing some positive stuff. But like I say, it's never as popular as the negative. It's not negative, but it's never as popular as the stuff that's critical of shit media. And fundamentally, that's what my channel is. It's a channel about shit media, and what they're doing wrong and what they should be doing instead. Okay. Fall says, "What up, Despot? I'm doing well, Fall. Thanks, man." And Yata says, "A bit exaggerated. Yeah, the Moriori survived, but they were down to 100 individuals. Jesus. The Maori came way closer to a successful genocide than Hitler ever did." That's interesting. Now I really want to read about this Moriori genocide. Thanks for all the great content. I learned a lot from your excellent videos, says the Orange Duke. I appreciate that very much, Orange Duke. Thank you for watching. Faw says, "Question for you, sir." Faw, if you have a question, put it in there. I will answer it. What do you think of certain Confederates like Robert E. Lee? Well, Robert E. Lee was an exceptionally apolitical figure. My understanding is that Robert E. Lee decided to fight for the Confederacy because Virginia went with the Confederacy. If Virginia had stayed loyal to the Union, I imagine Robert E. Lee would have taken command of the Union armies, because he was offered by Winfield Scott, I think you called him. Winfield Scott was brilliant, by the way. Hold on, let me just make sure I'm getting his name right. I hate getting names wrong in history. There's so many bloody names, you forget them half the time. I think Winfield Scott was the head of the Winfield Scott. So he was the head of he was in charge of the Northern military at the outbreak of the Civil War, and he was pretty much the only guy at the time who predicted how the war would go. He said, in order to defeat the Confederacy, we need to raise several massive armies, we need to blockade their ports, and we need to basically constrict them over a period of years. And nobody wanted to hear this. Like, they wanted to hear, "Oh yeah, we're going to have a big battle and the war is going to be over by Christmas." Winfield Scott, being a very experienced officer, knew that the Confederacy could only be crushed with a very bloody, expensive, difficult, prolonged war, which was fought on several fronts, and that's exactly what happened. He was smart enough to offer Robert E. Lee the command of the Northern armies. He would have been the man in charge. And if that had happened, the war would have been over very quickly, because Lee would have just crushed whatever the Confederacy had. But yeah, he went with the Confederacy because Virginia went. As for his politics, he did say slavery was a great evil. I mean, Robert E. Lee's position was that slavery was a great evil, but that it would die out in God's good time. I think that's what his position was. So he took a rather if you'll call it apolitical, he felt that the government should not be interfering in slavery. Also, he felt that it was a private matter, that this was a matter of a man's property and his private business, and that the government shouldn't be involved in this. That's my understanding. And as a general, there has been some attempts to revise Robert E. Lee's generalship, but they're futile. Robert E. Lee was an excellent general who did everything he possibly could have to stop the advance in the east, but he couldn't, because in the west there was nothing but incompetence. the Confederate generals and the rest were shit, basically, and they couldn't stop they couldn't stop first Ulysses S. Grant and then Sherman, and that's why the Confederacy fell. It wasn't Robert E's fault. It was the war was kind of fought in the east and lost in the west because Robert Lee couldn't be everywhere at once. He couldn't defend both the east and the west successfully. But his defense of the east, as far as I've read, it was exceptionally successful. He basically defended it until he had nothing left to defend it with. And the North had to spend gigantic amounts of blood. They had to lose huge amounts of men to conquer the East. All right, so Despot and Reaper are the best right now. Thank you very much, Wolf Council. And Fa says, Mr. Despot, has any nation really gone so far, even as they decided to use even go? I don't understand that question, Fa, sorry. Orange Duke, Trinker's negative videos are more hilarious. They are. I mean, negative videos are generally more hilarious. Like, it's a really good. You'll see this in my next video. Like, whenever a piece of media is really badly done, it's just a great opportunity for comedy. Ryder Paints in the Gillette videos, you saw how teenagers never wear a wife beater, which is true, except for me, it's the best thing to wear in 45 degrees Celsius heat in central USA. I'm sure it is, yeah. And hey, man, if it looks good on you, all the better. Moy says, I think one of the better examples of gay characters is Baldur's Gate 3. I haven't seen it. Stitch, who gave me $5. Thank you very much, Stitch. Apologies for arriving late. I didn't recognize that there was a live stream initially. Well, thank you very much for the $5. Princess Fiona, good movies are better reviewed by using them in context about bad movies. Yeah, I mean, that's also something that you can do. You can take a good movie and then you can say, look, this is really good. And here's an example of somebody doing it wrong and just missing that opportunity. So if I were to do a One Piece review, for example, I would talk about how the villains, you need to defeat them by the main characters have to defeat the villains by using their head and by using clever tactics instead of just being super strong and hitting them really hard, which is what happens in Marvel movies and Star Wars movies. And that contrast really emphasizes the quality that you're looking at on screen. Dean's Half Baked Productions gave me $10. Thank you very much, Dean. I appreciate that, man. Ryder Paints, love your videos, Despot. By the way, been subbed since the Worst of Work Awards. Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Thanks for the sub, and I'm glad you enjoyed the awards. I'm really looking forward to next year's awards. Ordika Shkirita says, hello, how are you doing? I'm looking at the Star Wars chopping block. I mean, the only thing I wouldn't get rid of in Star Wars right now would be Andor. I'm interested to see how Andor Season 2 will do, because they are going to release Season 2, and its reputation has really been building. There's been a lot of word of mouth about how good it actually is. So I'm interested to see will it have attracted quite a big crowd by the time Season 2 starts? Because that does happen sometimes. A Season 1 of television doesn't do so well, but it gets a lot of word of mouth and it builds and it builds and it builds. So maybe that could happen with Andor, but we'll see. We'll see, especially after Mando Season 3 and Ahsoka were such trash. Anything that has the Star Wars brand on it now is almost like a guarantee of low quality. So we'll see if I mean, I'm not optimistic. I don't think that Andor will be able to pull in a much of a crowd for Season 2. All right, Enal, what do you think about Simpsons predicting major future events? I think it's probably just a mathematical certainty because there have been so many Simpsons episodes, so many hundreds of them, that there's the vast majority of the time when they're predicting future things, nothing happens. Like it just didn't happen. But sometimes, like 1/10 of the time, they get it right. I mean, it's probably just random chance. Like you put on a blindfold, you throw a bunch of darts at a dartboard, you're eventually going to hit the bullseye. I think that's what was happening with The Simpsons, just because there's so much Simpsons, so many episodes, they were bound to get a few predictions right. And that's all it is. You make a bunch. If you were to make 10 predictions about the future right now, you would get a couple of them right. So I think it's just random chance. Orange Duke, the propaganda stuff is excellent. Then you will love the next video, Orange Duke. Nathan Malik, same question. How harmful would watching Barbie be to young girls' psychological development? It wouldn't be harmful at all. She'd just be fucking bored because it's a boring movie. My niece went to see it, and my sister took her and her friends to see it, and they were just bored out of their minds. So that's all that's going to happen with Barbie. The only people that really are Barbie's going to have any major psychological impact on are people who already agree with it, which is the vast majority of the time it's going to be white, middle-aged, Western feminist women. They're already converted, so essentially the movie's just preaching to the choir. Uh, Raggedy Andy, I've watched most of your stuff, and while I love your movie and show reviews, I find your advertising analysis really eye opening. You've changed the way I watch all content. Thank you. Thanks very much, Raggedy Andy. It's very important to remember when you're watching advertisements that a lot of the time it's not just an attempt to sell a product, it's an attempt at social engineering. And if it's not an attempt at social engineering, it's certainly an attempt to propagandize the company itself or a very specific message. Advertising, I really enjoy doing advertising because as far as I'm aware, I'm the only YouTube channel in this space that does that kind of analysis, and it's overlooked, and it shouldn't be overlooked because it's a major part of how essentially power established power controls the population. You have to brainwash them, and you brainwash them through media, and a big part of media is advertising because we see so many advertisements. So the brainwashing that goes on at the level of advertising is um, there. It can't be overestimated. It's huge, and it's important to know what you're looking at when you see that stuff. JS Pena says, not going to lie, when I saw the first trailer for Bros, I thought it was going to be a satire. But then later on, I watched another and realized, oh, yeah, that's going to bomb. Um, a lot of people on my Bros video will write that. They write things like, oh, you just didn't understand the movie. This was a satire of gay culture. It's actually really funny. And it's not. It's not a satire of gay culture. If you think Bros is a satire or a mockery or a one big gag at the expense of gay culture, watch the featurette. Just watch the featurette. They genuinely believed that what they were doing was important and historic. That is the words they used. Historic moment is how they describe it. It was described as a historic film by the people on set. They were just living in this big bubble of delusion. They really thought that this was an important movie that was really a huge stepping stone on the road to final victory for the LGBTQ2 plus movement. They really believe this. That they thought of it as that it would be a big cultural touchstone for LGBTQ. They didn't. It was absolutely not a parody. They were completely serious in everything that they were doing in that movie, and they really thought it was funny. Like they thought it was hilarious. It's absolutely crazy to think that someone could be so deluded as to look at Bros, like to look at a rough cut of Bros and think anything other than this is absolute shite. I mean, you'd have to be completely deluded to think that anything else, having seen that movie. So the Orange Duke, yeah, Lee was loyal to Virginia first, typical of the time, actually. Yeah, that would have been very typical of the time. Uh, First Last says, Despot, you're the man. Thank you. I listened to a podcast with Sargon about how the Leave Me Alone crowd is a losing organizing principle for fighting woke. Just curious on your thoughts. Well, I mean, the Leave Me Alone crowd, it's essentially here's a good analogy that I read recently in a book. Can't remember which book it was. I'm often reading several books at once. And this book, and I don't mean simultaneously. I mean, I'll read a chapter of this book and then a chapter of that book, and that's how I like to do it. Unless the book's really good and really holding my attention, I'll read the whole thing. All right. So basically, let's say you have two neighbors, and one of them, they're both farmers, and one of the neighbors is really aggressive, and he's quite strong. And he comes over to the weak neighbor and he says, "All right, well, so we've both got 100 acres, but I'm going to take 10 of your acres. I'm taking it. All right, I want those 10 acres. And when you give me them, then I'll leave you alone." So the weak farmer kind of just says, "Oh, like, you promise to leave me alone? Do you promise?" And the strong guy says, "Yeah, I'll leave you alone once I get those 10 acres." And so the weak farmer agrees and he gives him his 10 acres. And then what happens? The next month, he wants 10 more acres and 10 more acres and 10 more acres. And the leave me alone guy, at the end of the day, he's just left alone in his little cottage. And the other farmer owns the entire farm. He owns all the land in the area. And he's just hoping that farmer doesn't break down his door and steal his house. And what do you think's going to happen? He's going to come break down his door. The leave me alone attitude doesn't work. If you want to defend something, you have to actively defend it. All right, saying leave me alone isn't going to work. That is simply that is a fact of biology. It's true for humans and animals. You absolutely, if something is meaningful and valuable to you, you have to make an active effort to defend it. And if you don't do that, if you don't make an active effort to defend it, it will be destroyed by someone else, or it will simply disappear of its own accord. And that's the reality. So, the whole leave me alone and I'll mind my own business and you mind your own business, it's naive. I would almost say it's childishly naive. That's not how this works. This is about power. If people can attain power by taking and destroying things you love, they will do it. And it's that simple. I mean, assuming that's what you're talking about with the just leave me alone principle as a political principle, it just doesn't work. RRTNZ says, not to downplay how evil what the Maori did was, the Moriori were a very small group to begin with. The really sad part of the story is that the Moriori were pacifists and wouldn't fight. Interesting. I'll definitely look into that. Nathan Milk says, since you're an Irishman and not Ulster Scots, do you have any interest in American history, considering that my country has the largest? Well, I'm just interested in American history generally, not necessarily because of the Irish diaspora. I mean, I'm also interested in the history of the Japanese Empire and Roman history. I'm interested in a lot of history that has nothing to do with my own um, ancestry. And Princess Fiona, plenty of incompetent Union generals. Well, most generals in the Civil War were incompetent because when the war started, the vast majority of them were inexperienced. They had suddenly there were hundreds of thousands of men in uniform, in arms, and there just weren't enough competent officers to lead them, which is why you had so many absolute debacles in the Civil War because of just the sheer bloody incompetence of the officers that just didn't have enough of them. All the good officers had been in Mexico in the Mexican American War, and that was quite a small war, quite a small army. There just weren't that many of them. In fact, it's not a coincidence that Ulysses S. Grant and Lee were both experienced officers because an inexperienced officer wouldn't have been able to do what they did with large armies without the experience. Sherman's march to the sea when he burned down Atlanta can be compared with the actions of the German Einsatzgruppen. I think you mean the Einsatzgruppen in the Eastern Front in World War II. It can't. The Einsatzgruppen, their job wasn't necessarily to burn and pillage. The Einsatzgruppen specifically were sent to the east to destroy populations that the Germans considered subhuman. So the Waffen SS would go in and they would conquer the area, and then the Einsatzgruppen would come in behind them and they would carry out Jewish actions, for example, in which during which they would annihilate the local Jewish population and things like that. But Sherman didn't do that. Sherman just burned. He burned as much of the infrastructure of the South as he could, including houses. But he didn't commit genocide or anything. He didn't kill anybody. People would be given the opportunity to leave their houses. He destroyed industry. He destroyed railroads. But I think that it's profoundly unfair to compare Sherman's march to the Einsatzgruppen. Robert Agady, I don't think the South ever had a chance. The North basically fought. No, I've heard this argument, the arm behind the back myth. That's fundamentally flawed argument. It's based on the idea that the North was a single monolithic political tool that could use all of the resources at their disposal to attack the South at will. And that's not the case. The South were politically very divided. The North were politically very divided. Many people in the North didn't want to go to the South to fight. In fact, Kentucky even declared their own neutrality at the start of the war. They said, yeah, we're not getting involved. I think it was Kentucky. And a lot of people in New York were very pro-Confederate, for example. So the idea that the North could just pick, huge numbers of men from their population and send them to the front, it didn't work like that. If those men didn't want to fight, they would desert, or their heart wouldn't be in the fight, or they would get beaten. That's just not how a war is fought. A war is not fought between entity A and entity B. It's fought between human beings and people. And if the men in uniform don't want to fight, they're not going to fight. So, and in fact, that's why the North had to resort to conscripting people. It wasn't that they didn't have the population, it's that they couldn't access them because men didn't want to go and get blown up in a war that they didn't really give a shit about by that stage. So there's absolutely no. I think the whole one arm behind their back thing is based on almost like a communist understanding of what a country is. Bear in mind, countries fight wars, but it's individuals that fight war. If the individuals aren't interested in suiting up and booting up and getting armed and trained and going to war, then you're going to have to draft them, and that causes all sorts of problems. I mean, look at the New York riots. So no, the North did not fight with one arm behind their back. That is absolutely absurd. The North threw everything they could, everything that they could muster into the war, which is one of the reasons that they won. But I've heard the argument it's a dumb catchphrase made by some daytime TV historian based on the reading of statistics and economic comparisons. It's so dumb. I mean, no offense, man. That's just I'm familiar with the argument, and it's not a good argument. Sean Gillen, found your channel about a month ago, and it's refreshing how you annotate exactly how I see what's going on with the entertainment industry. Keep up the great work. Thanks very much, man. I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you find it insightful. Yeah, Trump. The Simpsons did a famous Trump prediction, which that one was good. Even the going down the elevator was good. But I mean, obviously, the Simpsons based the elevator scene on Trump Tower, so it's not that crazy. And RRTNZ give me $2. Ireland looking good in the Rugby World Cup. Good luck in the QFs. Thank you very much, RRTNZ. Okay, let me just go. Despot, you're very interested in American history. When I watched your videos, considering my home country has the largest Irish diaspora worldwide, I'm interested in American history because it's really interesting. It's just it's a very impactful, so it's an important history to understand. All right, let me scroll down to the bottom to the most recent comment here. Is Frederick Douglass your favorite abolitionist? I don't know that many abolitionists. I've read Frederick Douglass's book. It's really interesting. He was working as a craftsman, I think in Atlanta. Was it Atlanta? I'm not sure. But basically, he was in a city in the South working as a craftsman, and he had to give like 90% of his earnings to his master. So this basically, he would work all week at. He was on his own. He was living in his own place, but he would work all week at this. I can't remember what exactly it was he was doing. It's a job that has since gone extinct, so I can't remember it. But he was working at a trade that he was getting paid decent money for, and then at the end of the week, he would have to go to his master's house and just hand over his wages. Like, fuck. Just imagine how that would feel. You work all week, and then at the end of the week, you have to walk over to some fat, lazy bastard's house and just hand him over everything you've earned. Just horrible. And you can really feel the disgust when he describes it in the book. It's a really good book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's Frederick Douglass's memoir. And I would encourage you to read it if you're interested in that period of history. So yeah, I think that's what ultimately encouraged him to run away. He just could not stomach having to hand his money over to this bastard. And then sometimes the guy would give him some money back. And it's like, oh, well, that was generous of you, you know? Yeah, it's a good book. You should read it. I'm off topic, but I am just back from a preview screening of The Creator in Scotland. It was an amazing movie. I really enjoyed it. Everyone should see this movie. 4.75 out of 5, says Alistair Campbell. All right, The Creator. I'm going to have to see it now. That's high praise. I will have to see The Creator. Stitch, your expansive knowledge of the Civil War. Let's see. Moi says, do you know the Saints Row reboot? It was created within a leftist echo chamber, and a year later, it caused the studio to shut down. Saints Row. Was that a video game? I've heard about it. Yeah, I've heard about it. And the studio went down. That's the thing. I mean, get woke, go broke is true, but it's only true at a small level. Like a company at Disney can do it because they can eat the loss that it incurs. But if you're a small company, like a little video game studio, you cannot be messing with that shit. I mean, my advice for a small company like that would just be like, just stay out of the culture war. Whether you want to do something that's very, very conservative or something that's really woke, just stay out of it, man. You're too small to afford pushback on this. You don't want any part of this. But these morons obviously decided that they were going to save the world and make the world a better place and teach us all the way. And so, yeah, Saints Row Studio, quite deservedly, went bankrupt. Yeah, I did see some YouTube videos on that. Right. So I think that's enough for today. I've done 3 hours, and hold on, Nathan Malik, Despot, who is your favorite founding father? Well, I mean, hard question to answer, but I'd need to think about it. I'd need to think about it. But yeah, anyway, thank you everyone for watching, for tuning in. And yeah, really appreciated you staying with me through the chat and hope you enjoyed it. All right. My next video is out on Sunday and I hope you enjoy it. All right. Bye bye. Have a great day.